I'd like to reconvene the meeting of October 8th, the Bellingham Port Commission. We now close the executive session and reconvene the public meeting. The purpose of the executive session was to discuss real estate for consideration of sale, purchase, or lease pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101C. No action was taken by the commission during the executive session. I'd like to take a roll call. Commissioner Shepard.
Here.
Commissioner Bell.
Here.
Commissioner Briscoe is here. Let the record show that all three commissioners are present. Read the committee meeting schedules before we go to public comment. Marina Advisory Committee, the MAC, meets Tuesday, October 15th, 2019 at 6 p.m. Commission chambers here, Harbor Center Building, 1801 Roeder Avenue, Bellingham. The TAC Committee, Technical Airport Advisory Committee, meets Thursday, November 14th, 2019 at 9:30 a.m. at the ARF Conference Room, 2005 West Bakerview Road, Bellingham, Washington. The BIAC, the Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee, meets Thursday, November 14th at 5 p.m. in the ARF Conference Room, 2005 West Bakerview Road, Bellingham International Airport. So, under public comment, which we'll move to next. Can't pronounce the first person's last name, but the first name I believe is Ivan. And Shearling, is that how you pronounce that? Please state your address and.
Hello. My address is 2805 Erie Street, Bellingham, Washington, 98226. I'm here to speak for Bellingham Makerspace. My friend Mary, the director, asked me to come as one of the representatives. I was an instructor for woodworking courses offered at her makerspace. I believe they're trying to make aware about action item number 4 for the Port Commission approved renewal of the IPZ zone research facility piece. What I've been told, I don't know all the specifics, is that BTC is acquiring the lease, but raising the rent 4 times and giving us half of the space. So I don't know all the conditions that need to be discussed, but I wanted to address my concern that kind of makes it very difficult. The space is very important to me personally because they offered me a job when I didn't have one moving to Bellingham. And I really appreciate working with the community, people who want to make things. It's a very useful space, and it'd be a shame if it had to go.
So I do have one question for, you say you're a tenant there?
No, I'm one of the instructors that works with Mary, who is one of the tenants. I believe.
Makerspace is a subtenant right now in the Technology Development Center. And on the agenda today is a renewal of that lease with Bellingham Technical College where they take over all the space.
So Makerspace is leasing from?
From Bellingham Technical College, not from the port.
Okay, thank you. Next person is Kim Perry, I believe.
Yeah, I'm Kim Perry. I'm the president of the aforementioned Bellingham Technical College, and I came to this area about 4 years ago just as the Technology Development Center agreement between Western Washington and the port in Bellingham was being finalized, and what exciting times that was to have a collaboration with those 3 entities. And so we're really pleased that we're able to continue, Bellingham is able to continue that relationship with the port and able to take over the space that was previously occupied by Western. And we appreciate that with the raise in the lease for utilities that the port had been subsidizing in the past, and we fully embrace those increases. We too have seen increases in our other centers at the Railroad Center and at the Perry Center, and we understand that the cost of tenancy is increasing, and I want to encourage you to vote yes on the renewal of the lease and the expansion of BTC's ability to provide educational and economic development opportunities for our students. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The next person is I believe, Raquel,
Raquel, yes.
yes, Raquel, Rutherford.
Rutherford, yes. Hi. So I'm also here with the Makerspace. I have been volunteering as part of the Makerspace's leadership team for the past year that I've been living here in Bellingham. And the Makerspace was of personal value to me because it gave me community as someone who was new to the area, was unemployed, and didn't have a creative outlet. And since joining the leadership team, I've seen how valuable it has been in starting over a dozen businesses in the 5 years that we've been here and providing monthly places for such groups as TAG to communicate, the 4-H group, and other groups as well. And for our hundreds of members and visitors that we receive every month, we would really just like to be able to continue our relationship both with BTC and the port as a valuable part of the creative community here in Makerspace, so Bellingham. So thank you.
Thank you. Scott Sanderson? Is that correct? Hi, Scott. Okay. Can see you back there.
Hello again, everyone. My name is Scott Sanderson. I live at 2801 25th Street in Bellingham. I'm here also about the Makerspace. And one thing I wanted to say is that supporting the Makerspace helps you to fulfill your mission statement. The other thing I wanted to say is that the valuable community resources like the Makerspace are crucial to giving our young people the skills they need to compete in the international marketplace and in helping to inspire them to create the careers of the future. I've been here. I don't know if you guys have been there. Have you brought your kids there? I don't know if you've seen students there. But this is an incredibly valuable resource we have that our community really is benefiting from. It's an excellent star for the port to have, and I really would like for you guys to do everything you can to help to support them and to negotiate with them as much as you can to make sure we don't lose this. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Craig Cooper?
Hi, Craig Cooper, 319 South Forest, here on the south side of Bellingham. Commissioners Bell, Shepard, Briscoe, Director Fix, Port of Bellingham staff. I come here to urge support of dry stack storage along the Bellingham waterfront. Dry stack storage supports many jobs, including operators, marine trades, technicians, parts sales and service, boat sales, managers, and fractional charter ship owner programs, to name a few. These companies employ entry-level boat detailers at minimum wage all the way up to commission-based sales jobs in multiple six-figure salary range. One operator employs 80 full-time staff and 60 seasonal staff between their various locations. In talking with a few different dry stack storage facilities between Tacoma, Seattle, and Everett, demand for these facilities has steadily grown year after year, with one outfit having 5 locations and looking to potentially expand further. A haul-out facility like this would need saltwater access similar to Seaview and Hilton Harbor, but newer technology in forklifts has advanced the lesson of need for large infrastructure projects that the heavier-duty marine travel lifts need. I've heard that the current wait here locally for storage like this is 4 years, so my guess is that dry stack facility like the one I had mentioned would be successful here in Bellingham. Please consider thinking outside the box and consider dry stack storage as an option here in Bellingham. It would support marine trades, economic development, be environmentally friendly, and be a different way of people here in Whatcom County and afar, another way of access to our waterfront. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Marshall? Is that correct?
Yeah, Dan Marshall, 1973, Somerset. I'm up in Ferndale. I wanted to come and also share a quick story about the Makerspace. I too moved here several years ago. I did have a job when I moved here, but I worked remotely from home. And the only people I knew at the time were friends that I had through my wife who grew up here. And so it was very isolating for me in that situation. And I started trying to find ways to get out and meet people. I'm a technical consultant, so most of my coworkers that were in the area aren't the best to hang out with sometimes, or are always up for hanging out. And so I volunteered at the Makerspace as a way to meet people in this area, and really found an amazing community there. I've been lucky to be a member of Makerspaces all over the country, in Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up, and in Portland, Oregon, where I lived for 7 years before moving here. And of all the makerspaces that I have been a member of or visited, I will say that Bellingham's makerspace really is a jewel of those of that type of place. 3D printers that actually work, people who understand how to use the tools and are willing to help you learn yourself. Those are not characteristics that one can always find at other makerspaces around the country. And I don't want it to seem like that there's any kind of adversarial relationship here. Obviously, we would love to work with Bellingham Technical College and the port to come up with a way to continue to operate realistically. Rent going up for us so much is difficult for a nonprofit, and so we're just here tonight hoping that somebody can have some kind of solution that may help us continue to operate with our full tools available to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremiah is it McLoy? Am I pronouncing that correct?
Jeremiah McCoy, 917 17th Street. I'm here as one of the members of the board of the Bellingham Makerspace, and I am also the operations manager. The reason that we are here this afternoon is because we have received, a sublease proposal agreement from Bellingham Technical College. The sublease agreement that we received from them, although we're aware that that the rent has not been raised on the building in terms of the square footage, it is the utilities and the way that the utilities are being distributed in terms of who's paying for it that has increased our overhead expenses by somewhere around 450%, which is going to make it very difficult for us as a nonprofit. We are a volunteer-run organization. We have one part-time employee, and that's me. And our budget is extremely thin, but the amount of things that we have accomplished as a group, as an organization, as a community over the years has been incredible. We've made a very lasting impact with numerous permanent installations around town to beautify the city. As Raquel mentioned, numerous businesses have started based on experience that they gained in the makerspace. And we want to be able to continue to operate in a way that works for us functionally as well as financially. And so we're here to petition the port to do whatever is within your power to help to find a reasonable solution, both in the allotment of the space in the sublease and the budget constraints.
Thank you. Julia Aiken.
Does this come out? Hi. I'm Julia, and I live at 700 Wilson Avenue. I think I'm supposed to tell you that. I am first and foremost a small business owner who depends on the makerspace as a prototyping facility for my business. My company is called the Autism Project, and we are developing, it's called photobiomodulation devices, but call it therapeutic technology for kids with autism. And specifically, our goal is to put those devices in local schools so we can keep kids out of restraint and isolation. So I work very closely with Western, where I taught for the last 3 years. I sit on the advisory board for the industrial design program, and I've taught machining classes for the last 3 years. I also work closely with Mary, the owner of the Makerspace, who is also the director of assistive technology for the Ferndale School District. She is instrumental in the development of my devices, and we both assist many other companies in the local community with developing assistive technology to benefit kids with disabilities in this community. So one example would be 505 Access. They do adaptive screen covers for iPads. I designed their latest one. We did the prototype at the Makerspace. I don't know where on earth we would build that thing if we didn't have that Makerspace. I also just helped RealMax, a company that makes AR headsets. We're in the process of developing something in concert with a school. And it's in the early stages of development, but if and when we get this thing perfect, it's going to make a big difference in the lives of kids in the local community. So I teach machining, or I have taught machining classes at Western. I cannot use the facilities there for the purposes of this project because it's a private project. It doesn't benefit my students. So can I just tell you how frustrating it has been to have access to those facilities at Western, and I can't work on this stuff there. I also have not been able to work on it at the TDC because I was told you're not allowed to use state resources to benefit a private business. The only way that we can continue to develop these technologies is if we have access to the machine shop at the TDC. So what I would like to request is that you postpone your vote on that lease tonight, and I would like an opportunity to meet with someone from the port. You know, I met with Dodd. He actually tracked me down because I have a ton of contacts in the action sports industry, and I introduced him to REI, and I brought them here, and I introduced him to Evil Bikes, and I brought them here, and HO Sports, and a whole bunch of other people who I would love to help BTC get connected with, because my friends who work in those places want access to the TDC to do prototyping, and they want to work with students in Bellingham. We couldn't make it happen through Western. They just don't know how to deal with private companies. But I know a path where you can help this building live up to its original charter. I can see it very clearly. I can help you do that. But I need you to consider our needs too. So I'm asking you to postpone that vote and meet with us and at least hear what we have to say. I know I'm way past my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Davies.
Hi, Jason Davies, 2415 St. Paul Street here in Bellingham. I've been a member of the Makerspace for a long time, and I know that it supports your mission for economic development because it helps me develop my own personal economy. It helps me to run a business where I make stuff on our laser cutter, and I've taught me how to use 3D modeling software, and I teach 3D modeling to kids in elementary schools. There's a lot of ways that a nimble, small, nonprofit organization like the Makerspace helps a lot of people in the community who don't have access to stuff at Western, don't have access to tools at BTC or Whatcom to follow their own path, to learn the way that they want to learn, and have access to these life-changing tools. And the Makerspace deserves your attention, and I beseech you to help them to not go under. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the names on the sign-in sheets. Do we have anyone else in the public that wishes to speak? Please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Mark Allen, Allyn, 1108 East Victor Street here in Bellingham. I'd like to put my voice forward for the makerspace because of the reasons already stated that can help facilitate small businesses and allow people to explore what they can do with tools that they cannot afford to have either financially or space in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. That's all the names I have on the list, if you want to pass that along to. So, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Carrie, if you please.
A motion to approve the consent agenda items A through G.
I believe we were going to remove F and G, is that correct?
I think Mr. Bell is going to recuse himself for those two items and vote on the rest.
So,
Commissioners, why don't we vote A through E and then vote F and G?
very good. Any comments on,
I just have a question on D.
okay?
So, Brian, just tell me, I see there's $50,000 in there for assessment and 140 for planning. Do we expect to use that money in-house, or are we going to hire consultants or the LLC team that's already been working on this? How do you envision that money to be spent?
Yeah, Brian Gowan, Director of Environmental and Planning Services. Yeah, for this particular grant, we plan to go out for a request for professional services here and hire a consulting team that will do the vast majority of this work. We have a scope currently put together, but we were waiting on the grant to be executed. And so we would anticipate hiring a team of consultants that could do a variety of things, including land use surveying, geotechnical and environmental consulting, visioning, urban planning, that would ultimately, though, support the Millworks LLC group and their vision. But we want to keep it, if the grant is through the ecology with the port, so it's incumbent on us to do the contracting mechanism. But we're working very closely with the Millworks group to make sure that we're advancing the project that they envision, while also, if that fell apart, we would still have information that we could use to advance something else.
And is this enough money to get us most of the way there on the design and planning?
We think that it's enough to get us through some of the key steps. I think that the Millworks is doing their own independent work as well. They have some independent financial analysis being done and other things. We've tried to scope it. Once we get the results from the consultant selection, we'll know a little bit better if we can do all of this or maybe parts of it. And then additionally, some of it may be able to be captured in a future grant if we do go over the current grant. Certain elements that may be eligible for a future grant as well.
Okay. Well, thanks again to you and Gina for putting the work and the rest of the team who worked on this.
Yeah, it's exciting, and we've been working with the Department of Ecology. They're really excited to see this advance as well. Yeah.
Ken, anything on A through?
Yeah, I'm just going to make a small statement about the insurance rates. As I looked at and did the math on the insurance, it underscored what we were doing with the airport, I think last time around, is that all of our insurance rates are going up. And even though we didn't increase our liability coverages on these things, we had a 13% increase in our auto liability policy. We had an 8% increase in our excess liability and a 7% increase on an annual basis. That's huge, and it just underscores where insurance is going, and that we need to make sure this is on our radar screen, that we're looking at, in some cases, double-digit inflation rates on insurance coverages, specifically that auto liability. I understand there's some other factors adding up businesses, but the others did not have that, and we're still at an 8% increase. So,
are we seeing these increases because we're increasing the number of vehicles that we're insuring, the expense of the vehicles that are the
auto
cost of them, or is this just inflation for the same number?
I don't think it's inflation. I think it's market. Sorry.
The autos, we did increase the number of autos, so that is most of the increase there.
So we are increasing a greater number of automobiles under that policy.
That's right.
So the insurance marketplace, though, is seeing somewhere on the average of 15% increases on property casualty type insurance.
And I've seen that with my business, so it's just getting, it wasn't a shock to see this. It's not a deal killer, it's just keep it on our radar screen that this is going up for everybody. Other than that, I'm ready to vote.
Okay. So A through E, Carrie, if you please.
A motion to approve the consent agenda items A through G.
No, A through E.
Oh, sorry.
More time.
A through E. And
Is F the only one that you're not
F and G,
voting?
I'm
Oh, F and G, okay. Okay, thank you.
Can you read it one more
A
time?
motion to approve the consent agenda items A through E.
Commissioner Shepard.
Aye.
Commissioner Bell.
Aye.
Commissioner Briscoe's aye, carries 3-0. Now, items F and G, please.
Read it again just for F and G. I know.
A motion to approve consent items F and G. No, I got it.
That's it.
That'll do it.
Okay.
Commissioner Shepard.
Aye.
Commissioner Bell.
I abstain.
Commissioner Briscoe's an aye, carries 2-0 with one abstention.
And do you mind if I make?
Commissioner Shepard would like to speak.
I just wanted to make a quick comment for all the folks. I know that we have a lot of new people here who took time out of their day to give us public comment. We typically deal with public comment at the end of our meeting in other business. We also do have an action item on our agenda particular to the BTC lease, and also that brings in some of the questions that were brought up from folks here who spoke on behalf of the makerspace. And so we will address concerns and everyone else who took time out of their day to address us, but we typically don't do those in the moment of the public comment. So just so you know our process.
Thank you for pointing that out, Commissioner Shepard. Carrie? Mike.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Hogan, Public Affairs Administrator. Today I'm pleased to welcome back Lisa Citron. She's the project director from an organization called From a Child's Point of View. As you'll recall, she came in the spring to talk about a proposal to put some children's artwork along the ASB fence, and she's here to give an update on that project as well as talk about a new proposal that she has, but she needs a nod of support for a project that she's going to be developing with her class over the next couple months.
We bring her up. Is Sylvia Goodwin? This is what she's doing in retirement?
Hello. Thank you for inviting me here today or accepting my request to be here. So this week, a 10-year-old came home from school who's studying habitat loss. And her mom and I were having lunch, and her mom said, this is her child's question. What does the end of the world look like? And her mom was at a loss. I am too. I have no idea what the world is going to look like when it ends. And as Mike said, the last time I was here, you approved the installation of From a Child's Point of View, which addressed those feelings and those responses and questions when we look at animals going hungry and polar bears dying and people on the television saying we only have 15 years to fix this. Because of your approval, more people than ever who are going to be traveling that gorgeous trail facing the ocean are going to see the work and the ideas of the children. I brought in one sign that will be on the trail and one piece of 25 of the what the children made. Their drawing, it's blown up and cut into metal. So what this, thank you. What this piece illustrates, the children weren't directed what to draw or what to think about the issues of habitat loss. And what this child went to was the word salutary, which he had learned in our work together, which means, and he wrote it out for all of us who don't remember what salutary means, a beneficial action. And this is his image of what the park space can be for all of us and taking care of it. So we are guided by the teacher in what she's teaching about ecosystems and our interdependent relationships with plants and animals. But this situation of from a child's point of view and the work that I'm doing with the kids is asking them something that they're rarely asked in the classroom, which is, how do you feel about this content? And the children will say what they think about orcas going hungry because they don't have enough salmon. So next June in 2020, we want to put up I'm going to underscore this, really make it clear, temporary, not metal, a temporary new mural on the alcohol building. We need to go big. You might ask why. Because we observe that we need to do more to engage adults into the worldview of children. We not only need to listen to their worries about the future of life on Earth, we need to hear their ideas about how to solve problems that affect all of us. Paying attention to them is like paying attention to a child that you hold when they wake up from a nightmare. Our attention comforts. And I was trying to get here on my iPhone, something that was in the news this week, it's not coming up, that many years ago, a person who's 27 years old now, but was 15 years old X amount of years ago, thought up an idea out of the box, which was, why don't we make a vacuum cleaner to suck up the plastic in the ocean? And it was just announced this week that development is at last successful, and it's picking up not only microplastics, but the big stuff. So it's important to understand and to listen to the ideas of children. We're going to add something new to the project this year that we haven't done before, and that is that the fourth graders are going to interview grown-ups. They're going to ask grown-ups about what they have to say about the effects of global warming. They will interview community leaders, postal carriers, utility workers, fishermen, nurses, house painters. The interviews and the highlights from them will appear in the text, like the text here on this piece below, this beneficial actions, will appear in the text alongside the students' drawings. So imagine that if you yourself were quoted, wouldn't you go check out the mural to see what you said? Wouldn't you be kind of pleased to see your ideas writ large, so big that the whole entire town can see what you said? We hope that going big and visible will ignite new questions to ask youngsters. Will you help me figure this out? This is why we are asking you to approve one huge, double size, double big, supersize mural, a big mural that's not half as big as the problems being addressed. So on the screen here, what you see is 10-year-old Sylvia's proposal for a tree planter. I didn't know, maybe you guys know, that trees could soak up 2/3 of the roughly 300 billion metric tons of carbon that humans have thrown up into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. So Sylvia's tree planter is spot on. The mural will be temporary. It will be printed on paper. On a north-facing wall, the mural could last for about 2 years. And I want to show you some murals that have gone up in Baltimore, San Francisco, and on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. It's not moving. Help, help. There's one. This is in San Francisco, Baltimore, the reservation. So that's why we need a big building that we can see from the bridge. So my view is that now is the time to stand with our children today. Now is the time to stand with tomorrow's children. And I want to thank you for allowing me to ask you for your permission to put up a mural representing a child's point of view. What does the end of the world look like? Let's show the world the pragmatic, beneficial ideas kids have when they ask their question.
Thank you. Commissioner Shepard.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you coming to speak with us, and I think these metal cutouts are going to look very nice around the ASB pond. So looking forward to that. For my question for the cutouts, are they currently over at the city property in Maritime Heritage Park? And they're going to be moved, is that what I
Right, and Ram
understand?
Construction has volunteered once again. They installed it on the wall at the park, and they're taking it off and moving it down and installing it here on the trail
And what's the timeline for that?
within the next week or so.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And for the alcohol, the proposal for the alcohol plant, this would be a paper mural that would be adhered to the surface of the building,
Right.
and then it naturally decays and falls
That's
off?
right.
Is that how it would work?
Yeah, like us.
Okay. Mike, has staff worked on this and thought through this proposal?
Your Commissioner, so this would, I let Lisa know that the buildings are currently, under development. There's a lot of things going on the site, so, we'd have the caveat, we could take this artwork down at any time, or ask her to take it down if we were doing safety upgrades or whatever work's being done on the site. But it was a proposal, and I believe her class is going to be working on it over the course of the year, so she kind of needed the nod of the Port Commission to start fundraising to put it together. I did let her know that she would have to sign the same agreement that she did with the other artwork, and she fully understands that.
Okay.
I'd like to introduce you to Amelia, if you can imagine her on the building. And what she's saying there in role, she's pretending. She's in drama world, and she's saying, I am salmon. Like all salmon, I am just trying to survive global warming. I want to take one more minute here and show you this. I didn't know Makerspace people were going to be here today, or Jason was going to be here. And it's Jason who cut out these stencils. So last year's project, the children's drawings were made into stencils, 63 inches long and wide. They form a hexagon. And each hexagon has text that the kids wrote. Jason made, thank you, Jason. These stencils, they're sprayed with rain paint. You can only see them when it rains. So you can imagine how happy I've been with all the rain we've had.
I actually saw this at my daughter's school this morning when I was dropping her off.
Oh, that's right, at
It's
Columbia.
fun to see.
Right.
Well, I like the opportunity to engage people with concepts around sustainability, thinking about the greater challenges that we're facing and the real questions our children are asking us at home. So I appreciate you bringing that forward. I think activation of our waterfront space is something that I'm certainly supportive of. I like projects that get people down there, making use of the space, being excited about the space, envisioning themselves being there in the future as development happens. We've put, both the city and the port have put some extensive money into public projects to get people down there making use of that space to ready the public for the development that's going to be coming. And I think when we get other people down there, it really just benefits all of us. And when I go down there to play at the pump track and to enjoy the park, I see people of all ages in that area. And I think a project like this would also benefit us as well.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bell?
There's no action on this tonight, is there? So, no, I don't have any.
No action? What does that mean?
It's just a presentation.
There's no request for the commission to vote on anything.
Yes.
Just take it in your.
Oh, I was hoping that you would vote on it and that if I would be able to raise the funds to put this mural up.
So that's a bigger question than we're prepared to answer this evening.
Okay.
So we just
I
need to
didn't
have this go
understand
through a
that.
process where
Okay.
we get some of that so we can have some input back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's just too much involved, too many pieces in play. I think Mike can explain those to you at some point. We've got developers, we've got the site, we've got the size, we've got the content. I mean, all of that has got to be discussed.
We have a public process we have to go through. The informational that you're giving us is the first, and then we have to have a public comment, as we've had tonight, when we take action on an item. I think it's a very good project, and I would like to see something done with it. But as Commissioner Bell stated, we don't have won't be voting on this evening. We have the public process we have to go through. But I kind of think this is probably going to be on the next agenda. So work with Mike some more. We'll get some more ideas, and maybe we'll see you on the 22nd.
Thank you.
But I think it's a
Okay.
very, very good project.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming and letting us know.
All right.
Carrie, if you please.
Motion authorizing the executive director to approve an interlocal operating agreement between the Port of Bellingham, Port of Skagit, Port of Whitman, Port of Ridgefield, Port of Kalama, and Port of Pasco.
As you know, we have engaged in installing some fiber in the county. We're actively in phase one of that, where we're putting fiber optic cable out to the Kendall area. Part of that process is operating and marketing that fiber. I've gotten together with 5 other ports to make up 6 ports to decide how best to do that. And the conclusion we came to was to establish an entity between those 6 ports to house a staff member, or maybe 1.5, that would do those activities, rather than each undertaking a staff member ourselves, which would be 6, maybe more. We think we can do this much more efficiently as a combined entity. So we've worked with the legal team. We've developed an LLC. The 6 ports will own that LLC. The initial investment by the Port of Bellingham is $200,000 to capitalize that entity. That just gives them enough money to start, buying some equipment, making some payroll. The cash flow of that over about 5 years, we end up with more capital in that entity than the $200,000. You do get to a low point where that entity only has a couple $100,000 in the bank, because in the early years we expect the burn rate to be greater than the revenues. But over time, if the conservative projections play out, then we'll be very well off and have a good ownership stake in this entity that'll return our $200,000. So I'm asking you to approve this transaction. We'll be partnering with the Port of Skagit, the Port of Pasco, the Port of Whitman, the Port of Kalama, and the Port of Ridgefield.
Commissioner Bell.
Yeah, my only question was, I like the equal contributions, that was nice, but what's the Port of Whitman's?
The Port of Whitman already has purchased a bunch of equipment, and because they have an extensive fiber network already in place, and they're going to donate some of that equipment to this entity for their $200,000.
Same value?
Yeah.
Okay, that's my only question.
Is that the 6th port that's mentioned here?
Correct.
That's Whitman.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so it should be Port of Bellingham, Port of Skagit, Port of Whitman, Port of Pasco, Port of Kalama, and Port of Ridgefield. That makes 6.
Well, I think it's a great idea. Anytime that we can get together with our fellow ports and save not only their folks money, but the folks in our county money, and we can use some equipment instead of double purchasing it. And I think it's good business, and it's what we're supposed to do. So kudos to yourself and Don and Gina for getting this put together.
Yeah, I agree. I hope we are sharing success stories like this with the broadband office. There's a state that has a new office that's working on broadband, and hopefully they're able to learn from some of the work that we're doing on collaboration mutual investment in infrastructure.
Our thinking is that this LLC could end up being an area of expertise in the state and provide the services to entities outside of those 6 ports. So we will be sharing it for sure.
And we're at the tip of the spear when it comes to that, yeah.
Gentlemen, anything else? Rob? Carrie, please.
Motion authorizing the executive director to approve an interlocal operating agreement between the Port of Bellingham, the Port of Skagit, the Port of Whitman, Port of Ridgefield, Port of Kalama, and Port of Pasco.
Commissioner Shepard?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Commissioner Briscoe's aye. Carries 3-0. Carrie, please.
A motion to approve the Western Crossing Innovation Park Development Plan per the terms of the Second Amendment to the Western Crossing Memorandum of Understanding between the Port of Bellingham and Western Washington University.
Thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowron, Director of Environmental and Planning Services. This action item that's before you today for consideration actually builds upon the update that we gave to the Commission at the August 13th Commission meeting. That it was a progress report essentially on the work that we'd been doing with representatives from Western Washington University to develop or prepare a revised development plan for the 6 acres of property that the Port's been working with Western on in the Waterfront District for a number of years now. So not to go into too much detail of what that presentation included, but just as a reminder, we talked a little bit about the background and history, how we kind of got to where we are today, worked through the work group that we had formed and the work group efforts that we were focusing on, as well as identifying some of the industry sectors that we were focused on looking at for potential partnerships with that could dovetail well with Western's existing educational programs. And then really the main part was looking at a transition away from a standalone higher education campus to more of a public-private partnership type of approach where we could have a development partner that could come in, construct some of those buildings, bring in business partners in those specific industry sectors that would then partner well with the Port and or Western's programs. So that's where we left it based on the feedback that we got from the Commission as well as Western's representatives' feedback from the Board of Trustees. We progressed from that update to where we are today, which is we're happy to present the actual end result of that, which is the Western Crossings Innovation Park Development Plan, which was part of your commission packet. And that's the write-up and the document that we'll be asking for approval and consideration of today. So before jumping into this brief presentation, I did want to acknowledge that we have some representatives from Western here who participated in the work group. Donna Gibbs, who's the Vice President of Marketing and University Relations. Brent Carbonell, who is the University Provost and the Vice President of Academic Affairs. And Brad Johnson, who's the Dean of the College of Science and Engineering.
Thank you for coming this evening.
Yeah. And then on the work group also included Commissioner Bell, myself, Don Goldberg, and Jennifer Novak out of the Economic Development group here at the Port. So I'm just going to go through a brief presentation here, and actually I'm going to hand it off to Don here in a moment because the main focus of tonight's presentation, which is also going to be the exact presentation that the Western Group will give to the Board of Trustees later this week as they consider approval of this plan, so that we're all kind of getting the same information and discussing the same topics, is to focus mostly on the public-private partnership or the P3 model. And Don's the expert in this field. He's worked in this arena, so I'm going to pass it over to him here in a moment. And he'll take it from there. And then I'll step back in and talk a little bit about the next steps in the implementation plan that we see moving forward. So the goal of this was to really focus on this P3 scenario where we have an innovation park, more like a business research park that could be comprised of private sector industries as well as public agencies and institutions of higher learning. And set up some facilities that could expand the existing employer base here in Whatcom County and Bellingham, while having applied learning and integrated research opportunities for Western's programs, as well as providing, businesses that are in the field of industry that Western students are currently pursuing, providing job outcomes at the end of their educational path. And we're really looking at hopefully having a net zero energy type of approach, and really looking at that as an innovative campus as well. And just to follow up on some of the industry sectors we'd mentioned before, but really focusing on clean energy, R&D, maritime engineering, cybersecurity, and other industry sectors that dovetail really well with existing programs like the engineering programs, the Institute for Energy Studies, and other existing degrees that Western has right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don, and then I'll pick up here after this part's wrapped up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Don Goldberg, Director of Economic Development. And thanks, Brian, for starting this presentation. As Brian mentioned, we've been working together as to how do we keep the Western Crossing concept moving forward, but tighten it up and make it work for the community as well as all the partners. To reiterate, it's 6 acres out on the waterfront. And the process is moving forward as Western is getting close to closing the property that they'll be selling to put funds into this partnership. So things are moving along. As you can see, P3 models are very diverse. A very important part of a private-public partnership is that everybody has equity in the partnership, whether that's a form of dollars, property, expertise, but it normally associates with dollars, and it's really important that everybody has skin in the game. So we felt that the best model to propose would be to put the land in as the public part of the partnership. So Western Crossing Partnership would contribute the 6 acres, or if that land was adjusted up to a larger parcel or decided to be smaller, we can adapt the value. Another aspect of this would be whether the port or Western or both institutions would commit to space on the project, and that could be in lease form or actually ownership of condo space or freestanding buildings on the space. It's really desirable to have skin in the game and potentially seed the project with occupancy. So if the port or Western or both had space there, it would not only make the project easier to fund, but it would be an attractor to other businesses. And then, of course, the outside developer brings in the funding, the development of the project, the marketing of the project, and the expertise. So some of the benefits of P3s, I've mentioned a couple, but it allows investment to be spread over the lifetime of the asset. So if the building has a 50-year lifetime, the ownership would be for that term, or of course, if the asset was sold, then the equity would come back to the partners. The private sector has a better track record of delivering product on time, and often at a lower price. And so it transfers the risk to the private sector, and it provides them a long-term incentive to maintain their buildings, because operation and maintenance is typically on the owner-developer. And then it's often lower cost because they can develop at a cheaper value than the public sector. So what would it accomplish? You know, there's basically the two sides. The first side we'll go over is the private side, the developer side. They often are the companies that I would imagine that we would work with are the most up-to-date. They knew all the new building systems. They're ahead of the game. They have the capacity to move it forward much more timely. They can push the public, and they can drive a a budget that is more sustainable than the public normally does. They have a large-scale portfolio of tenants. Many developers have buildings throughout the region or wider, and many of those tenants follow the developer to other markets. They are specialized in building business parks, and they are marketing specialists on getting tenancy there. And then, of course, they have these deep-rooted relationships, which we often don't have. In terms of the public side of the partnership, we are the owners of the property. We support the project politically and potentially have the ability to push things through. As mentioned, we might seed the project and bring other tenancies and forms to the project, and of course market it. And then we can't forget why we're doing this, and that is to promote our region, to work closely with Western on supporting their degrees, which would then support the private sector to be here, and it would create this organic circle of bringing companies here as well as supporting our university. And then this is something that is being done throughout the world and the country. To not do something of this nature when we're trying to bring jobs of the future here, I think would be lacking rather than so. I believe we need to move this forward on the next generation. How do we do it better than the last group? I'll bring it back to Brian to finish up.
All right, thank you, Don. So yeah, with all that set up, really what we're looking at now is, we've been talking about this for a while. That was one of the commission's earlier complaints. There's been a lot of talk and discussion and plans and things written down. So we wanted to make sure that we put in this a clear and concise and as detailed as possible implementation strategy. And you go from very specific, and then you'll see as we get into the out years, it gets a little bit more vague because we have a little less predictability. But what we see for next steps is pending commission and Board of Trustees approval of this plan is finalize and adopt this development plan as we've presented, and then potentially look at amending the memorandum of understanding between the Port and Western regarding the Western Crossings setup. I think depending how this goes, if we approve that, I think we'll then, one of the next steps will be a separate discussion with Western on the structure of the MOU, and then that will then inform some of the more details moving forward as well. So we didn't want to get distracted with those discussions now. We wanted to look at the plan and whether that stood on its own, and if so, then I think one of the next steps would be to look at amending the MOU potentially. And after that process, I think in early 2020, we want to start to move. Commissioner, did you have a question? You were okay. Sorry. And we wanted to try to move as fast as possible and not really, just step back and take a breath because we've accomplished this plan. We want to really lean into it and would start immediately to try to establish the Port and Western P3 team and who would be on that. It may be the existing group, it may be other expertise that we want to bring into that and really get the right group of people to lead this forward. Then one of the key steps will be to determine those development commitments that each entity is willing to make, and that's going back to some of the things that Don was saying. What is the catalyst that each group is willing to bring to the table? Is it funding? Is it commitments to be tenants? What is that? And that has yet to be defined, but that's an early decision that has to be made. Once we would agree on that, assuming we can agree on that, then we would really launch into developing a request for proposals and to issue a P3 proposal to see who in the market would want to come and do business with us. Then work on defining the location and the footprint, the project area, establish the P3 criteria that we want to evaluate those proposals against, and see who responds and what comes out of that evaluation. So that would take up most of 2020, really realistically. I mean, I think we like to be aggressive, but just seeing that process, there's a lot in that when you really if you were to break that down. And then 2021, assuming we could get to a P3 agreement, start to establish those actual development parcels, do some preliminary design and layout work, initiate the actual project permitting. And this is where it starts to get more and more vague because there's a lot of work that goes into that. It looks like it's a simple step, but then we'd initiate project construction hopefully as early as 2022 with occupancy up, as early as 2023. So, oh, and sorry, we do have a few more things. And then continue to develop those projects, assuming that's successful, and have multiple projects that could fill out whatever business park or research park setting we'd like. We do have ongoing work that we're doing, though. This will be done in conjunction. We're continuing to work with industry partners and the sectors that we'd identified. That's just what Don's group does. It's what Western's group is doing to reach out to those. It's part of the economic development of the region, so we'll be doing that anyway. And then we'll need to be coordinating closely with the Department of Ecology, because this is a portion of the site that is not yet done, completed all the cleanup, so we'll have to be working in conjunction as these plans developed to make sure that it works with the Department of Ecology's cleanup requirements. So with that, any of us here would be happy to address any questions you might have. And staff does recommend approval of the development plan.
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Bell. Commissioner Shepard.
Sure. Thanks for all the specifics in this. I think you guys did a lot of work in a short amount of time, so I appreciate Commissioner Bell being representing us for the commission and for everybody who worked on this. We were just I don't know, in the spring we were over in Spokane and we saw one of these in action, one of these P3s. This was with the Avista utility and a nice partnership they have with both Central and with Wazoo and several others. And it's really a dynamic building that they created, something that is very energy efficient. It's a net zero building. It's really they were able to take a lot of risks with the type of building development that they were able to implement and do something pretty cutting edge that in turn has made the space really attractive for those partners and has really kind of created a catalyst and a hub. I think it is even called the Catalyst Building that they've put together. And it's really drawn a lot of people in and a lot of partners together. They were able to move on a fairly rapid timescale. They were able to leverage a range of different partnerships and different things that different organizations could bring to the table. And I think they've done something pretty exciting. I was excited touring it. I was excited seeing the energy that they had brought forward and the partnerships that they have. So I hope something like that is able to be achieved here. I'm certainly looking forward to, my biggest questions are about how much space, We've got 6 acres allotted potentially. Are all those 6 acres needed? Some fraction of that. The plan here creates a pretty wide range of uncertainty. And I'll be looking forward to getting some more of those specifics as we move forward.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Commissioner. We intentionally avoided trying to define the space because we acknowledge, the group as we work through this acknowledged that this could be a single building, this could be a campus of buildings. It really depends on what comes out of that RFP process. But we didn't want to tie it exclusively to the 6 acres. So yeah, that's and the Catalyst Building is a great example that we talked about a number of times in that work group as a model for this. They had a lot of unique scenarios that we may not be able to duplicate, but they had a lot of really inspiring components that really were part of this plan.
And tell me about the Hannigan Road site. Is that still on track? I saw it's
Actually,
delay.
the last contingency was lifted, so it's now in closing. So I would suspect, I don't know, surely 45, 60 days for closing.
Okay. And there were some hard numbers about the potential value of that property and the potential value of the waterfront site. Are those numbers holding? Do we have a sale purchase number that is public for that site?
Yeah, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I don't think the amount the property sold for is what anyone initially expected 10 years ago when we first put the concept together. But it's what we were expecting for the past couple of years as they've been marketing it.
Okay.
And that's one of the elements that may influence these next negotiations on any amendments to the MOU and the structure of what that relationship looks like now, given the current setting. But it's a good time for those discussions after this.
Okay. And my last question is maybe one for Provost Carbajal or someone else from the team. the first iteration of this idea got some pushback from faculty because it was too STEM focused and narrow in its concept. Are we going to see a similar level of opposition? Does the university administration have ability to move this forward? And do you feel that faculty and staff on campus are going to be supportive of this project?
I think I might be able to help a little bit too on this. I don't think it was necessarily that it was too STEM focused. I think there was just too many people in the room with too many varied interests.
Yeah, I would confess to a little bit of confusion about exactly what the obstacles were at the time that you're referring to. But to answer your question, I think the felicitous aspect of this is that it is a model, thus typically would not be associated with one discipline or another. Certainly what we see here articulates what probably will be successful, and that is clean energy, that is technology, et cetera. But the fact that this is a development model, rather than plucking certain almost randomly things from various areas and trying to put them into a box, this will be much more appealing to campus broadly. I think the group that Vice President Gibbs had put together on ideation will be instrumental in thinking those things through as well, and helping articulate what the vision really is. But certainly on any university campus, if there's seemingly a decision that's privileging one area over another, that would be problematic. I think what Commissioner Bell refers to is what the university had put forward in the spring, and this is a very different model. So I personally would be pretty optimistic that the answer to your question is it will go over well.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bell?
I'm going to start off my comments by saying, what an incredible team. Thank you. First and foremost, you put up with me. You don't have to laugh.
We're all chuckling.
And what a focused effort it was. And I think the public needs to understand what a commitment the university brought to the table to reach this agreement. And they put the right people in the room. We had great discussions and came out with a solution that could involve just about anything. And I think we removed the anchor of the 6 acres from the water, so we can now float this boat and wherever it may go. It may even include an agreement with Harcourt somewhere down the road to take some space that they have involved. So it's not limiting us to the 6 acres that were once limited to. The idea of it being public and private, we've got models out there that show that there are jobs being created and education happening in places around the world, and I think that recognition came to fruition. I think we actually even found some great models. Don did an incredible job of research and even took a trip without me to go see one of those places. So I think first and foremost, what an incredible thing is the flexibility of this is off the chart, and I think we will come up with a real quality product. As far as the Western Crossing design goes, I think we should explore what that looks like going forward. And I think it depends on what the RFP looks like. And I also think it depends on what properties are being contributed from who, what, when, and where. And we'll probably bring that forward at a different time. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that's right.
Otherwise, I think this accomplished everything we wanted to accomplish. And I want to thank you you three for all being in the room.
Well, 3.5 years ago when I came here, we were discussing these things, and we didn't have much movement, but it looks like we might have some movement now. Thank you for the work you folks put into that, as well as our staff. And thank you, Commissioner Bell, for being there. I'm glad to see this plan. It's much, 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 much better than what's been presented to us before. It's well more organized, and I think it will take us into the future if it's developed properly. As always, I like to move, move, move. So I don't want any moss growing under anyone's feet on this one. And I'm going to leave that to Commissioner Bell to keep that moving forward. But once again, thanks for for coming together on this so we can get something moving for everybody, and especially for the young people that need this to move into the future job places and so on. So thank you. Thank you, Brian. Anything further, gentlemen? Director Fix, anything to say? Carrie, if you would, please.
A motion to approve the Western Crossing Innovation Park Development Plan per the terms of the Second Amendment to the Western Crossing Memorandum of Understanding between the Port of Bellingham and Western Washington University.
Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Commissioner Shepard?
Yes.
Mr. Briscoe's yes. Carries through.
Thank you, Commissioners, and thanks to the entire team that worked on this. It was a very collaborative effort, yeah.
We're going to take a 10-minute break. We will resume at 10 minutes to 6.
There will be another public comment period when we return.
We are going to change the action items here just a little bit. We're going to move 4 up. I know we've got a fair amount of people here this evening. I think our next item will be, could be lengthy, I'm not entirely sure. But so we're going to move up. And Carrie, if you please.
Sure. Motion by the Port Commission to approve a renewal and modification of IPZ Zone Research Facility lease between the Port of Bellingham and Bellingham Technical College, BTC.
So Commissioners, as you know, we had the TDC developed, I think it was 2008, 2009-ish. It was an agreement between Bellingham Technical College, Western Washington University, and the Port of Bellingham. The agreement that at that time did not allow for subleasing at all. I understand some of that is probably taking place in the building as we hear from testimony tonight. The agreement, as we've modified it, and now are exclusively putting the deal together with Bellingham Technical College after Western told us they no longer had a need for the building. The Technical College expressed a need for the entire building. So the Port staff started negotiations with them. What you have in front of you today as a result of those negotiations, it does allow for subleasing of the facility, so they are allowed to lease to entities like Makerspace. Port staff are not privy to any business terms between the Technical College and Makerspace. I do understand that no deal has been done, no sublease is in place that is currently being negotiated. So I'm not sure where the 4 times rent comes from. That's kind of in between Technical College and Makerspace. But what you have in front of you is the deal between the Port of Bellingham and Bellingham Technical College for 10,000 square feet in the F Street warehouse. We are getting a small amount of rent, I think $16,000 a year, so $1,500 a month, a little less than that. And then we are now getting reimbursed for our utilities, which in the past the Port has paid all of the utilities for that space. So the Technical College will now be picking up their own utilities, and that's the primary differences in the agreement.
Do we know how much that was, Rob?
The utilities?
I do not have that information.
We can find that out and get back to you on that.
And is the rent equivalent to what it has been in the past, or is that rent changing?
Sorry, thank you, Commissioner. Terry Leahy, real estate representative, property manager. It is equivalent. The way the original agreement 10 years ago was written, the rent was going up by 4% annually, and this continues on the same trend. And sorry. Just to give you a bit of background, as Rob mentioned, yes, in 2008, the Port received a $1 million grant for a research and technical facility. In 2009, the Port entered into 10-year agreements with Western and BTC for the facility. Those agreements are going to end at the end of this month. Western has indicated they're not going to be renewing, and Bellingham Tech College would like to take on the full 10,000 square feet. A couple of modifications to the agreement that were made, as Rob mentioned. The Tech College will be picking up the utilities, paying us a nominal rent for the space, and we have also modified a couple of the provisions to more in line with our current leases. One's for the signage provision, and the other bigger one is it does allow for subleasing of the space to other entities with the Port's prior permission. To go to the Makerspace, in the past, I believe about 2 years ago, Western Washington University entered into agreement with Makerspace, which the Port approved that sublease with them. But that sublease will be going away at the end of this month with Western's lease.
Mr. Shepard?
Yeah, I really like having BTC at the waterfront. I'm very supportive of having them be an active partner down there, and so I really do hope that continues. I have a lot of questions about the IPZ zone designation. Does our renewal here renew the IPZ designation?
I'm not too sure if that zone still exists or if it's in play. I believe that our agreement was for 10 years and we would commit to 10 years, which we have done so.
Yeah,
Can we get the
no,
full, Acronyms are great.
Yeah,
but if you don't have-
Innovation Partnership Zone. So in 2008, we were granted the IPZ Innovation Partnership Zone from the state of Washington for this
Research and technology.
marine technology. The thinking at the time was that, developing the hydrofoil for vessels like All American Marine builds would be done in that building. It never really panned out that way. I think a little bit of that research and development was done there with Western, but then the building started to be used in a lot of different areas other than that, including vehicle research by Western. You heard about the 3D printing. I mean, you see skis and snowboards being made in there, which is, it's great that we're doing that type of activity, but it doesn't really fit with the IPZ. I don't know what our status with the state is on that IPZ. It's kind of a separate topic that we can come give you a presentation on.
Yeah, we're definitely not listed. I mean, if you go back into the state from 2008, you'll find us listed, and you can find the announcement about us getting the IPZ money, and the other partners who at the time were also Alpha was a partner, along with TAG and us. So there was that partnership model was baked in. I don't know if we ever accomplished the partnership or if we accomplished the research.
We put together a facility that we had intended to put together, and we used the state IPZ zone, and that came with some grant funding to put that facility together. So I think we did accomplish what we wanted to. It just morphed into a little bit different use than we anticipated. It was less about building the hydrofoil and more about other research and development.
Yeah, and if I'm not incorrect, I think most of the classes that are meeting down there are for the pre-engineering degree. Is that correct?
It's for the composites degree, and then we also have the Bachelor of Applied Science and Engineering Technology that meets there. And we have, it's where we house our EAS for operations management. We also have an NSF grant where students are doing maker-based learning, and there's some partnership with the makerspace on that. That takes place there as well, where students are working with, they just started this fall with outside organizations to design engineering concepts and provide solutions.
Okay. So since we didn't get that on the microphone, maybe you could just come up and we should just repeat that on the mic. You can use this one.
So the programs that are housed there now are the composites program. We also have the Bachelor of Applied Science and Engineering Technology, as well as we house the BAS for operations and management there as well. And in partnership with the Makerspace, we have an NSF grant where students are receiving scholarship money to go through one of our 6 engineering programs and then work with community members or community organizations in a maker-based environment to design solutions to problems that they present.
Could you state your name, please?
I apologize. Yeah, my name is Ray Cabista. I'm one of the deans at Bellingham Technical College.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I really like having BTC down there, and my question is, can we expand this? We're expanding your square footage, and can we expand the potential impact of the work? It seems like, we're having classrooms down there, we're having students down there. I like that the makerspace is down there. And given that this had an initial thrust for really creating those industry partnerships that allow us to tackle the challenges of our employment sector and our need for current technology and development, are we doing that to the degree we should be? And how can we help to make this even more impactful?
I think we're trying to grow the programs. Composites has a little bit of room for growth within that. Part of it is having the space and allocating the tooling needed to grow those programs. The Bachelor of Applied Science and Engineering Technology, the 4-year degree, or the bachelor's degree, the 2 and 2, is designed to have a lot of engineering problems that they're working on and bringing in industry as well. So that's one of my big goals, is to continue to bring industry down there, continue to grow the programs, continue to have partnerships with other organizations to leverage those networks and get those students that experience, but also the exposure to the local industry. Our goal is to get those students jobs, and if we can work with industry to create solutions while we do that's the ultimate goal, but is to grow, to utilize the 10,000 square feet and to get more equipment down there to better serve the students and the companies they're going to work for.
Is there anything we can do to help?
Sign the lease.
Well, there's that.
I think that we'll identify additional ways, and as we find that, won't be shy to ask. But I think the goal at this time is just to continue to grow the programs. Advanced manufacturing at Bellingham Tech are some of the programs I have, and they're all full. They're at capacity, and we expect to do the same in the training delivery center as well. It's just having the space and allocating the time and the resources needed to grow those programs. It takes time.
Yeah. Well, we've got a really tremendous resource with Don and his team for being able to think about the opportunities for connecting with industry partners and really leveraging the resources and the potential down there for positive economic development. And so I don't know if we need a small group to meet on this again to keep brainstorming about how this can be more impactful. As we go into the future, what industry partnerships, what sectors of our economy are most pertinent to you guys being engaged with.
Absolutely.
But that is certainly something I'd be willing to participate in.
No, that's great. And with the NSF grant that we have in place with the students, we have 12 scholarships that started this year. We'll have 12 more, so we'll have 24 students in the program, and it goes for 5 years. And those are areas where we want to reach out, meet those companies, find those solutions that we can go and just expand the program within the TDC.
So while I have you, we heard comment that the makerspace is going to have half the space and 4 times the rent. From what I'm hearing about the makerspace, I kind of get a similar opinion that we need to connect them with more resources so that they can do more as well. They seem like a prime opportunity to get some funding support so that the good work that they're accomplishing, and they really do seem to be meeting a need that is for the private sector to be able to explore and innovate in a different way than either of our higher education institutions make possible.
Commissioner Shepherd, I'd
can
like
you
to
address a little bit of the...
intervene a little bit. I think we're getting in between a lease and a sublease on this, and I think that's in the weeds.
Okay.
I think if Makerspace needs something additional, and they're not getting it from the sublease from the college, they could certainly come to the port and request those resources, and then we would have direct relationship and direct responsibility for that. But for us to get involved in a sublease with a tenant, I think is out of order.
Yeah. That's probably...
They have the opportunity, if they're not getting what they want from the technical college, to come to the port and say, we need some space.
Okay,
It
I
does
think
fit our
that-
profile.
that's enough of the discussion on that, gentlemen. Let's move on with their discussion. I think we're agreed. We're not going to get into the sublease stuff here.
Yeah, I think that's probably wise. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll let you guys work that out.
A
And,
dean with a sense of humor. I never had one of those.
Well, yeah.
Dude, let's bond.
Thank you for your time.
Commissioner Bell, any questions? Glad to see education growing on the waterfront around the Marine Trades area. So the other issues at hand, the gentleman that we were starting to speak to, I think we'll talk about later on in the meeting, as we told the folks we would. So I have no questions, but thanks for doing what you do down there. Appreciate it. Carrie, if you would, please.
Motion by the Port Commission to approve a renewal and modification of IPZ Zone Research Facility lease between the Port of Bellingham and Bellingham Technical College, BTC.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
yes.
Mr. Briscoe's yes. Carries 3-0.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. So now we're going to jump back to 3, right? Correct.
Authorize the Executive Director to approve material modification number 1 to the project memorandum for Harcourt's Waterfront Residential Project in accordance with Section 5.2 of the Master Development Agreement.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowron, Director of Environmental and Planning Services. As the Commission is well aware, back in 2015, the Port entered into a Master Development Agreement, or MDA, with Harcourt Bellingham LLC, which is a standalone LLC that is owned and operated by the principal directors of the larger development company, Harcourt Developments, based out of Dublin, Ireland. And we've been working with them since that time on a number of projects in the waterfront district. And actually, we have a couple representatives from Harcourt in the audience tonight, Pat Power and Nick Dougherty, who are here visiting from Ireland, working on some projects and actively working on some of the leases and other projects throughout the waterfront district. And but I'm gonna walk through a little bit here. I wouldn't be my first choice to go through and talk through the intimate details of the master development agreement, but because we have this is a kind of a process-laden action memo, I do want to go through and just highlight kind of the process of how projects are proposed and work through with the commission, and if there's any changes to those projects. And then if you have any specific questions about this second project, waterfront residential project, or the schedule associated with that, I think that you'd feel free to have a discussion, and representatives from Harcourt would be happy to answer any of those questions. So the typical process for how a project is developed through the master development agreement is that Port staff works really closely with Harcourt on the concept, talks through what the ideas are, what the potential footprint would look like. So there's a lot of early discussions and back and forth. Then ultimately, Harcourt gets some direction from staff that, yeah, that looks like a project that would work. And in this case, using the waterfront residential project as an example, what's the next steps is that then they would propose an actual project. And just as a reminder, the MDA grants Harcourt exclusive development rights within about 19 acres of the waterfront district. At that time, that wasn't a wholesale transfer of property. Rather, we do it on a project-by-project and parcel-by-parcel basis. And they propose a project, and then the Port Commission considers approval, and then ultimately sale of that property to Harcourt. And so the first step is to develop a project memorandum. That has a little bit more detail to it. It has kind of the concept, the footprint, the square footage, and what the uses would be in that particular project, and as well as a project schedule. That comes ultimately to the Port Commission for approval. Once that's approved, then we move forward with the property sale to Harcourt. So, but keep in mind at that point, really, when that original project memorandum was developed, they didn't even own the property. They haven't done the due diligence of the geotechnical design. They hadn't started going through the city's process, permitting process. So we anticipated that even after the project memorandum was approved, that there would likely be changes along the way. Some of them might be minor. Some of them could be what's considered in the agreement a material modification. And that's what this is before you for consideration, is the material modification number one. That could be a substantial change to the layout or the visual appearance of the project, or a schedule change that pushes the start date of construction or the completion date of construction out by more than 60 days. And since the project memorandum for the waterfront residential was approved by the commission last year, Harcourt has been diligently pursuing the project, but they've gone through some of the early permitting steps with the city, had a number of details they had to work out. They got some feedback from the city that some of the building height scenarios that they had assumed were correct, needed a little bit more work. There was also some site-specific geotechnical work and some other design considerations that they've had to undertake. So they communicated to us that their schedule for start date of construction had been impacted by all those changes, and they've noticed that provided us notice that they are requesting a material modification that then has to come back to the commission for approval. So the schedule adjustments that they've proposed include this kind of bullet points here on the bottom of this slide. The land use permits to be submitted in September of 2019, that has been completed, and the city is currently processing those. Then to follow up with a garage and foundation permit, building permit application in January of 2020. And followed up shortly thereafter with the actual building permits for the structures, buildings A, B, and C shown on the figure here. That will be submitted to the city in February of 2020, with construction starting in May of 2020. So staff has worked through this. We think this is still a relatively aggressive schedule. There could be other hiccups with permitting and other process, but Port and Harcourt have agreed that this would be an acceptable schedule to try to advance. Staff does recommend approval of this given where we're at in this project, but I'd be happy to answer any questions on the process. And if you have any questions specifically for Harcourt, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those as well.
Commissioner Shepherd.
So Brian, could you just reiterate how much an extension we're being asked for here?
Yeah, it's from the, I apologize, I don't have the currently approved, but it's on the order of 4 to 6 months, really, from what their anticipated original project memo approved schedule was.
And for the initial schedule, who determined that the initial design schedule for these dates and when projects should be started, when permits should be in, and when things should be completed?
Yeah, there's a number of, and let me clarify one thing. The construction completion date has not changed. So that's an important factor. It's really the construction start date in this case. The schedule is proposed by Harcourt. That is something that is part of that original project memorandum, and then this followed up. This material modification was also a schedule that was proposed by Harcourt. I will add that we worked together though to make sure, as we were going through this process, we learned a few permitting steps, and we've adjusted what their originally proposal was to make it more realistic with what we found out recently for some permitting steps. But it is a Harcourt proposed schedule generally.
Well, you know, what I'm trying to get at is that it's unpopular to provide an extension. Mm-hmm. And I want this project to be successful, but it's certainly something that I'm going to get a lot of phone calls about. People have seen this project going on, and they feel that it is not moving nearly fast enough, and we're not seeing the investment that we would like soon enough. And so there's frustration. I think you've heard it from the commission. You've probably heard it from City Hall yesterday. And we really want to see evidence that we're a top priority for development. And pushing this out even further is going to just exacerbate existing concerns in the community that Harcourt hasn't come to the table fully and isn't invested in the way folks would hope they are. And for me, I just wonder, you know, you guys have made successful projects all around the world. You have some very successful projects going on in Belfast and Liverpool, and are those projects would those projects be able to succeed without the degree of local project management that that I see as lacking here? You've got projects that are moving along probably from what I hear, quite well in Europe, but I expect that those projects have regular project managers who are moving them forward, staff on hand, professional staff on site, people whose job it is, who live in the community, who know the folks in the permitting office, who know the folks in the building community to see those projects really be successful to the degree you want. But we're not quite seeing that here.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Shepherd, for your comments there. Pat Power, Harcourt, Bellingham. The commencement of this particular project and the other buildings that I can mention in relation to getting on further with the development here in Bellingham, really we can't start building until we get permits. In any location in the world we're in, we need to get the permission to do so. We had a speed wobble here in relation to getting on with the waterfront residential in relation to interpretation of the building height. There is a dedicated building height because of the shoreline presence, and the adjudication of the start point of that height was in flux for a little bit of time, not of anyone's making, but so until that was actually firmed up, we can actually get on with getting in for the permits. We've submitted for the land use permit, we're ready to go, and it will beat the date in terms of but in terms of getting in the foundations and then the 3 buildings themselves. Once we get the building permits, then we're permitted to actually commence the construction of the buildings. And once we commence the construction of the buildings, as Brian Gowan pointed out, the completion date hasn't changed. But but that's the bit we can't do. The second part of your comment there is in relation to a professional team, project management meetings, etc. We have a dedicated professional team locally, headed by Zervis Architecture, Kaufman Engineers, Freeland, and others are part of that development team. And obviously we've regular contact with them. So in fairness, it's their frustration. We're the bearer and of the brunt of that result. But yes, we're fully committed. It's been all money out for us to date, and happy to do so. I think the next big milestone for us as an organisation and for the waterfront, for the port and the city and the waterfront development itself is the adoption of, please God, you mentioned the presentation yesterday evening of the sub-area plan amendment, because anyone we've actually spoke to on the wider scale and on the larger scale is what actually is the vision for this particular site. Again, it's something we submitted in March 2018, 18 months ago, so we're hoping to get it out this calendar year. Probably not, again, a length of process we would have expected to have encountered, but we have, and all going well, it becomes ratified, which allows the vision then, so we can actually sell the bigger ideas, which we have to make Bellingham an alternative to, as we've often discussed privately, to like a Seattle or Vancouver and all the good things Bellingham have to offer. So I suppose if once that's we can actually then start shouting about this is the grandiose master plan for the 2 million square feet, which can include the likes of the Triple P that was discussed earlier with the university. There actually is a very eminent example of that in Titanic Quarter. You mentioned Belfast. There's 25 acres of it done, which was started out life as the Northern Ireland Science Park, which was a collaboration with Queen's University and Ulster University, and it worked very well. First building is actually, you've used the phrase there, innovation. The first building is Innovation House. They've actually renamed the park to Catalyst. You mentioned that as well. So these are actually within that particular development. So once this master plan gets approved, we actually have the ability to get on with the likes of the board mill, which we've discussed here a number of years ago, which will be an owner-occupied building from our own perspective, and really push then to get occupants here. The residential waterfront, we're in for the permitting. We have to go for further permitting as per Brian Goran's outline schedule. And once we get the permission, stroke permit to start, we want to get on with it. Because from us to date, it's all been money out, which is all part of the plan. But the quicker we can get buildings complete, because that's the only time we ought to get, like yourselves, rental income or get money coming in. So if that hopefully addresses it. But in terms of local presence, yes, we've only the smallest. There's probably, if you take the alcohol plant out of it, the granary building is the second smallest building that's earmarked to be done as part of the, so effectively, and that's complete, as you know, and we've 4/5 leases signed, and we're trying to get the other 5 over the line in the next this month.
Well, I appreciate that. One thing you mentioned is just constructing that vision, and another piece I feel is really been missing is how you bring in the wider community to participate in that vision process. And I've mentioned this to you guys, I've mentioned it to Max, I've mentioned it to Chris, your local broker here. The community likes being part of that discussion, even if it's just being informed about what steps are happening and when. That is a really positive way to garner goodwill, to ratchet down the uncertainty, and when I always feel that when the community knows less, the conspiracy theories go up, the quantity and severity of them. And so anything that you guys can do to really engage the community on what you're thinking about happening next, how can the community have some input and be a part of that conversation, I think will really benefit your standing here substantially and help to really have your organization and the projects that you're doing be embraced.
Yes, many thanks. I think you're 100% correct. I think information, communication, be it both ways, is key. And as we do in other locations, what we intend to do here is do an EZ newsletter quarterly. And really we were intending, and it still is our intention, to get with the next number of occupants that intend to open up with the granary, is really to use that as the catalyst, and then do them quarterly or every 4 months, i.e. 3 a year, whatever it takes for that particular purpose, and that particular purpose only.
Well, my last question, then I'll turn it over to others. Is there anything you can do to provide us assurance that you have the finances in place to accomplish this project?
We have the finances arranged to accomplish each individual building as it goes along, yes.
Is there anything you can do besides that to give us assurance?
Yeah, and I'd like to invite you to see other developments we're doing, and we've probably 3 schemes launched this month, where we actually have the permissions and the permits allowed to get on with them, and they actually, so you can come and see those anytime, more than welcome.
Doesn't exactly answer my question, but so you're saying that you have other projects in the works, so to feel assured that the capital exists and can be applied?
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Bell.
That might go to the heart of my issue. We feel like the stepchild here in Bellingham, because we see what you're doing elsewhere. And we don't think we're getting the same attention here. And quite frankly, gentlemen, we take the political fallout because you're not here. You're in Ireland. So when somebody complains about this pace of development, they ask the Port Commission, what's going on the waterfront? Why aren't you pushing hardcore? We're the ones that take it. And if something doesn't happen, you know who doesn't get reelected? It's not you guys. You've got plenty of projects going forward, right? So we've been taking, and I think 2 years ago I said this very same thing. You need somebody here who knows what they're doing. When the height issue came up, that was your doing. You realized you could get a little bit more elevation, another story. You said, let's go try for that. That started that process of the permit, so you can't blame the city entirely for the delay. It goes both ways. Part of it's you, part of it's us. But a huge part of this is you don't have anybody here locally that can speak for the company. And I think you need somebody because your reputation here now is not good. And you need to hear that loud and clear. I'm a supporter, I'm a fan. But your reputation in this town, in this community, is not good. Having somebody here who's a professional, who knows how to walk through the permitting process at the City of Bellingham is vital. Anybody who's in this room can tell you that's gone through a permit that it really matters who you are. There are people here who don't get along with the city, who have permits take years. There are people who know how to get through the city, who can get them pushed through in a very short period of time. And I wish that weren't the case. I wish justice were blind at the permitting department at the City of Bellingham, but it's not. And you two, gentlemen, you're taking the brunt of this, but you're at the point now where they're not in any hurry to push your permits through because you treated us like a stepchild for the last 2 years. And when you say, look at the other developments we're doing, we do. We want to be like them. Rise this community and this development to that level so that we are like them. Zervis is great. That was a huge, huge benefit to you and your reputation here. But they're not going to put the permits through. You need somebody dedicated who can walk into that city. And this is the offer from me, and I would imagine the rest of the commission. I'll hold his hand, her hand. We'll go down there with them to help you get this done in the time frame we have allotted. We're partners with you on this, but we don't feel like that at times because you leave us hanging. We take the brunt of the criticism. The timelines don't match. We don't have answers. You still have vacancies in the granary. What can we do to help? We will help, We can't relax the timeframes, but we need a commitment from you to bring somebody in who's a professional, who knows how to walk to the city of Bellingham, go through that process and say, look, here's my time frame. It's a tight time frame. You got to help me, city. We'll go to the city and advocate on your behalf. That's our offer. But you can't leave us here alone. You've got to bring somebody into this town, because right now, I don't think you can do it on your own and meet the timeline. That's my personal opinion. That's not an opinion of anybody here. The lawyer's probably going to shoot me when we're done. But I don't think you can. I think you can with our help. I think you can with somebody who's a professional who understands how to walk through the system. We can get there. And then everything changes, because then your reputation changes, the permitting process changes, the attitude around here changes. I mean, none of the staff is liking the idea that on a weekly basis somebody says, what's going on? How come the granary's not? Where's the building? And our excuse is always something reasonable. That's always the truth. But the time for that is over. Let's put this thing on the fast track. Would you do me a favor? Would you put some resources into this town? I asked for it 2 years ago. Your time crunch wouldn't be what it is today if 2 years ago you had brought somebody to this town that could walk these things through the permitting process. You'd be in an entirely different place today. Your reputation would be in a different place. Our patience would be in a different place. So it's the hard truth, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I think you need somebody here to do that, because we're not going to have the patience if you don't meet those timelines. We will if you enlist our help and help us along the way as well, and then dedicate the resources to Bellingham that you have elsewhere around the globe. That's my request.
Anything further? So, thanks for coming to Bellingham and starting this project. I think you guys will carry through. I think you'll finish the project. Nick, I spoke with your father face to face. I think your group has the best interests. Things slow things down. Why they've slowed down, I don't know. I don't much care for the permit process at the city of Bellingham, and I'll say it publicly. I think it kind of stinks. I think it could be a lot better than it is, and not just for you folks, but for everybody in this county that's trying to do business and needs a permit to do that. The excuse we get is we've backlogged. Well, the only reason you're backlogged is you don't have enough personnel to take care of it. So maybe we need more personnel up there to do that. 3.5 years ago, well, 2.5 years ago probably, we spoke about similar things when you came before us and needed an extension then, and we moved forward on that. We do get a lot of heat, gentlemen, believe me, we do. It's, I mean, I'm up for re-election and I'm getting heat almost every day on what's going on over here. I have faith in you guys. I'm a pretty quick judge of character of people. I think that there are a lot of extenuating circumstances on all parties why things aren't getting done as fast. Sometimes in this day and age we're in, people don't have as much patience as they should have. You have done some great things in other places, and I would too like to see you do a great thing here. Your reputation with me is fine. I think that when push comes to shove, you're going to get the job done, but you need to start pushing, please, because what Commissioner Bell said is true. We can help. We will. You're in a small town here, basically, from what you're probably compared to working in, and everybody knows what everybody's doing. Everybody makes their business, everybody else's business, and so on and so forth. So just please do what you can do to speed things up. It would be greatly appreciated on our part as well as the folks in the county. So, and thanks for being here tonight to answer some of these questions and take some of our verbal abuse. Gentlemen, anything further? Carrie, if you would, please.
Authorize the executive director to approve material modification number 1 to the project memorandum for Harcourt's waterfront residential project in accordance with section 5.2 of the master development agreement.
Commissioner Bell.
Do me one last favor. Would you ask for names of people who can push those permits through? Because we can provide them. And if you do that and we can get somebody in here who can push these things through, we'll have no issues. And with that, I will say yes to this extension.
Commissioner Shepherd.
I'm a yes as well.
Commissioner Briscoe's yes, carries 3-0. Thank you, Brian. Pat, Nick, thank you.
Motion by the commission approving the commercial lease and project development agreement between the Port of Bellingham and Bellwether Harbor Investments LLP for the ballroom at Bayview Center Building, 12 Bellwether Way.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Judy Harvey, Senior Property Manager. The new commercial lease and project development agreement terminates the banquet space use agreement the last day of the month in which the lease is executed. Provided that the Commission approves of this transaction, that would be October 31. The term is effective the first day of the month following execution, which would be November 1, 2019, and provides for expansion of the ballroom. This transaction will result in a long-term lease of 23 years. The project cost is estimated at $325,000. The port is to contribute 30% of the project cost. The project cost and bid is subject to Commission approval. If the Commission does not approve of the project, the port's commitment to expand the ballroom ceases. Provided the Commission approves of the project, the amortization payment is effective on the first day of the month after substantial completion of the project. The user fee rent begins upon the lease commencement and runs through January 31, 2023. Beginning February 1, 2023, base rent kicks in at $5,000 per month, plus the concession fee of 5% of gross exceeding $400,000 per 12-month period was negotiated and will more than cover our 30% cost over the term of the lease. This transaction will meet our customers' needs by expanding the ballroom space to accommodate larger events and will increase revenue to the port. Staff recommends approval of this transaction.
Thank you, Judy. Commissioner Shepherd.
I like this idea. What's the history of the building? When we purchased it, was the building built for us to purchase, or how did we acquire ownership of it originally?
So this building was actually built by Mr. Paulson. At the same time, he built the hotel, and he retained ownership of both until he sold them to Mr. Molnar. At which time Mr. Molnar decided he didn't like the rent on the Bellwether office building, the Bayview office building. So we sat down with him to talk about rent and offered to buy the building from him. And we got it at a reasonable price, or a price we thought was reasonable. And I believe it's met or exceeded the financial projections we gave the Commission at the time. So it's been a fairly good investment for us. But that's how it came about, is that it started off as a rent or land rent negotiation, and it came out with us being Ken Bell's landlord. And he was not a commissioner at the time.
How much time transpired in between the building being built and us purchasing?
It was built in, what, 99? Yeah.
Okay. And there was not a ballroom during that time?
No, there was a ballroom there.
There was always a ballroom.
Ballroom was always there, and that's why it made sense for the hotel owner to also own the Bayview building, because the hotel utilized that ballroom. When we bought the Bayview building back, we came up with an agreement for them to use that ballroom. That agreement is now expired, or is soon to be expired, is being modified here.
This excuse me if I may.
Please.
This new commercial lease and project development agreement will terminate the banquet use agreement provided you approve of this transaction, it would be terminated effective October 31. And the new lease would be effective November 1.
And this allows us to get bigger events in that ballroom, something we hear over and over again. We need to accommodate bigger events. We looked at all kinds of ways of expanding that ballroom, taking it out towards the hotel over that plaza. Everything was really prohibitively expensive. This was a fairly simple thing we could do for a reasonable amount of money and get a lot of extra bodies in that ballroom.
Well, it's clearly a need. People ask about those meeting event spaces, and they're in high demand, and there's just not enough of the size to handle large groups, so. Sounds like a nice deal that you guys have orchestrated.
Commissioner Bell.
100% support. I've been in the hospice fundraiser there when it was barely room to breathe. So this is necessary, and with Harcourt not putting a convention center on the table anytime soon, I think the community needs this desperately.
I don't have any questions for you, Judy. Thank you. Carrie, if you please. Any further questions, gentlemen?
None.
Carrie, if you please.
Motion by the commission approving the commercial lease and project development agreement between the Port of Bellingham and Bellwether Harbor Investments LLP for the ballroom at Bayview Center Building, 12 Bellwether Way.
Commissioner Bell.
Yes.
Commissioner Shepard.
Yes.
Commissioner Briscoe's yes. Carries 3-0.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Motion by the Port Commission to approve a modification of lease between the Port of Bellingham and Norman M. Walsh doing business as Walsh Marine for premises at Blaine Marine Industrial Area.
Good evening, Commissioners. Brady Scott, Senior Property Manager, Marine Trades. Walsh Marine has operated the boatyard in Blaine for the last 8 years. As the only boatyard in Blaine is an important port asset to maintain and expand into the future. In 2018, the Port and Walsh Marine put together an agreement that provided for the development of a new building facility to be constructed by the Port. The Port completed the building design earlier this year and solicited a bid for construction. The bid process resulted in one responsive bid that was ended up being rejected due to it being significantly over budget. In response to that, the Commission has increased the project budget, and Port staff have negotiated a change to the Walsh Marine lease agreement for your consideration tonight. Port staff are prepared to rebid the building project upon Commission approval of this modification of lease. The modification provides for the following. It acknowledges that the primary purpose of the new building is to benefit the Port's long-term development of the Blaine Marine Industrial Area for the continued and ongoing use of premises as a boatyard. It clarifies that construction of the building is subject to future approval of the bid award. It adjusts the lease from a 40-year term down to a 6-year term ending in 2025 and sets rent for the new building facility to a negotiated amount payable upon completion of the building. This modification benefits the Port because instead of the value of the building being incorporated into a long-term 40-year lease, after 6 years, the Port will be able to solicit further lease offers for the boatyard and negotiate a rent that maximizes the return on the building, resulting in an overall positive to the Port. And with that, the Port staff recommends approval.
Commissioner Shepard.
I want to just commend the staff for their creativity in figuring out a deal that can work here. I do hope the bid process is successful and we're able to bring this project within budget. I agree with you that there's a strategic importance of keeping a active boatyard in the Blaine Harbor. We're going to be doing a lot of other improvements to the site in terms of cleanup and reorganization, and the area is just really going to be primed for good use, good economic activity, and hopefully some living wage job creation coming out of it as well. I don't have any other questions.
Commissioner Bell.
Yeah, I'm also liking this too, and I think I have expressed in the past that I really am looking for an upgrade in the Blaine area. So along with this, we have requested the staff talk to Mr. Walsh about making his operation a little bit more professional, so that it is commensurate with the building. But I will say there was something that I really liked, and that was the fact that this building is going to be something that is an asset to the port, whether Mr. Walsh is there or not. And that is a huge benefit to that marina and that area. So I'm fully supportive of this.
Well, I think everyone knows I'm very supportive of doing whatever we can in the industrial site in Blaine to get it back on its feet and put it to work as well as other people. I think everything we can do in Blaine will help the economy of Blaine one way or another, and that's what we're supposed to do. So thank you to the staff, Shirley and Brady, for figuring out a way to make things work. And I'll say to the folks that'll be bidding on the next building, please have some room in your heart so we can get this done. Carrie, if you please.
Motion by the Port Commission to approve a modification of lease between the Port of Bellingham and Norman Elm Walsh, doing business as Walsh Marine for premises at the Blaine Marine Industrial Area.
Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Commissioner Shepard?
Yes.
Mr. Briscoe's yes, carries 3-0. So I did not ask about public comment when we came back from our recess, but I did ask Carrie if there was anybody signed up. She said no. Is there anybody that would like to speak at this point in time about anything? Very good.
So I just want to say the reality is
Could you please state your name?
Oh, sorry,
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
Julia Aiken, 700 Wilson Avenue.
Thank you.
Small business owner, the Autism Project. We make therapeutic devices for kids with autism. I just want to say that the reality of the decision that was made tonight is that the makerspace is going to close at the end of the month. And what that's going to do is shut down the closest thing we have to an engine for economic development for small businesses in this community. So I appreciate that from the port's perspective, it's a relationship between a tenant and a sub, lesser, whatever. But I hope that I can share with you that getting the makerspace into that building took 6 months of effort. Negotiating the waters at Western. And at one point, we were very close to having an incubator in that building. So my understanding is that the TDC was created with $1 million of taxpayer money for the purposes of incubating small businesses in Bellingham. And as one of those small businesses, it is intensely frustrating to walk into a place like that. I had the privilege of touring it the first thing when I got here, and it's empty. Completely empty. And I want access. I needed to make prototypes for a different client. Okay, but it's controlled by Western, and for academic reasons, either liability reasons or a limitation of you can't use state facilities for the purposes of private benefit to benefit a small business, I couldn't have direct access to the machines, right? So by virtue of having an academic entity that can't allow the use of their resources for private benefit, it's by definition prevented the use of that space by small businesses. So
Disregard the bell. Keep talking, please.
Okay, thank you. I've tried really hard as a private citizen to help solve this problem. I spent 6 months as a volunteer down there. I convinced Art Sherwood, who runs the Idea Lab at Western, the entrepreneurship program, to move his downtown operation into the loft at the TDC. When I told him about it, he moved in 2 weeks later. He understood instantly. The vision was to create something like the incubator in Burlington, Vermont, where I'm from. It's a space with all sizes of different offices available as sort of on a month-to-month basis for businesses, right? So you can rent office space as a private entity, small business. And there's also a maker space, so you have access to the ability to whatever. If you're me and you want to make prototypes for a client or an assistive technology device for one of the schools around here, you can do that. If you're an artist, great, you can do your thing. There was a group of students who were part of the Idea Institute who made furniture. And, you know, we did an architectural model of what the space would look like, contributed, I don't know how many hours of design work. All they wanted was direct access to those machines. And eventually, they faded away. We couldn't ever get past that issue of, this is what this building exists for. There's all these businesses that belong to the Idea Institute. The director has moved in. We've got a design for the office space. We've got the machines downstairs to build the furniture. We designed it all to be built on those machines. We were going to do it with our own two hands, and we can't do it because we can't get access to the space, to the machines.
Commissioners, yesterday's the first I learned that there's anything going on with Makerspace and the Technical College. It came to me in an email. As I stated earlier, we have a lease with the Technical College, not with Makerspace, so we weren't privy to any of that information. I'm going to suggest, because we're very short on details here as to what occurred there, I'm going to suggest that Don and Shirley and myself sit down with the Makerspace folks and see if we can't get some sort of agreement with them, and then we'll act as an intermediary between them and the Technical College or come back to you with what we found. But right now, staff isn't prepared to even have a discussion on this because we have zero details. We just have some public testimony.
Okay.
I'd like to have a little discussion on it, though. But would you finish, please?
Well, I'll just share that in terms of resources, so Mary has way more machines than are already in the space. She has an entire wood shop in storage. So the machines are available. There's a technician from Western who recently left Western. He has experience running a machine shop, a profitable machine shop, like a job shop. He's the world's sweetest person. I know the perfect person to run the space, is what I'm trying to say. And I can give you a list of, I don't know, 15 or 20 businesses who would move in and rent office space in a heartbeat.
Okay.
So the pieces are all there. The sticking point has been public access to the machines.
Yeah, so Director Fix would like to get you and some other folks together as staff.
When we're talking about public access to machines, I have no idea who owns these machines. The port doesn't own the machines.
Right,
We
right,
can't
right.
give you public access to machines we don't own. So this is why some discussion needs to happen between the Makerspace and staff. And I just don't think debating this in public is the venue to do that.
And there's a lot of details because this didn't just come up yesterday. There's some history here that we need to understand before we can go forward. So we understand that, but by that same token, I don't think there's a one of us that isn't supportive of what you're trying to do.
Don't
take
what
this
we
for
did
that.
tonight is that we're throwing you guys to the wolves. That's not what's going to happen.
No, and there's a guy sitting next to you that has got a vested interest in making sure that we keep innovation on the front burner. So you're going to have some resources from the port at some level, but we just need to understand it.
Okay.
And
I think you should feel like you've accomplished something by being here because you really got the importance of this organization and the success stories on our radar. If we let this lease expire, we would have a lot of challenge with a major tenant. We can't just willy-nilly let leases expire with a major educational institution for a major property here. And so I don't think we were prepared to hold up a lease agreement with a strategic partner for this issue. But you've got our attention. You guys are doing some good work. I've seen examples of your work around the community. I've toured the space, and I know it's got potential, and I think you've articulated really well the missing piece for private partners like yourself to be able to access that type of technology. And so I would love for Dawn and our staff to figure out ways where we're able to leverage some of the resources to make this more successful. I think other ports, have taken on incubator spaces with a little bit more zeal, and I think it's something we could do. We haven't really created a space that we call an incubator space here. And I really appreciate when those happen naturally, like the makerspace is doing some of that incubator work for us. And some other ports have, made that part of their mission and their allocation of resources to create those incubators. And maybe that's something we should consider here more as well. I think you've given us some things to think about and some ideas to brainstorm.
That would be amazing. It's an engine, an economic development engine waiting to happen. And right now, the makerspace is the closest thing we have to that. But I'm sorry to say, Mary is a really good friend of mine. And given what I know about her offer with BTC, she has no choice but to close at the end of the month. So that's going to be the short-term problem. And I really hope we can come up with a solution.
I think at the end of the day, you're going to find a better solution. And this may not be the space, but we have a ton of resources at our disposal. So maybe there is a space that can be an innovator space that will fit the needs. And I think it's also a time to double down with some of your supporters. In a time like this, that's when they come to the table and say, let's figure out how to make this work. And it may be a better result at the end of the day than what you currently have. I would be surprised if it weren't.
I would be more than happy to rally the troops.
Yeah, thank you for staying. Thank you for staying and speaking. One person does make a difference. I need some clarification on the makerspace stuff, of what we had with the power now. Was that the grant? Did the grant cover the power before, or what's changed for the utilities and stuff? Why?
Well, we covered the utilities. No, the grant built a lot of the infrastructure. It was a capital grant, so it built the building and some of the equipment, I believe, that went in the building. But no, we've been on the hook for the utilities since it opened. Our agreement with BTC was that they'd pick that up. We didn't cut that agreement with any idea of what they were going to negotiate with Makerspace.
So this is just fallout from kind of what we did because we didn't realize what was going on there.
I think it's appropriate for BTC to pay the utilities on a lease like that.
Yes,
I mean, everybody else from the port would have to do that.
Yeah, it's a yes and no
But
situation
if
when
it
it
weren't for the
involves.
makerspace, we would have no issue with that. The fact that it drove that group out.
But see, and this is where I need more information, because I don't know that it's the utilities that's the problem here. I need to talk to BTC, we need to talk to Mary at Makerspace, we need to find out more details, because we're talking about access to equipment they're not allowed to have. That has nothing to do with utility bills, I think.
I just was trying to figure out what, we just paid the utilities because, or what?
That was our original agreement, is to get this thing going. That was part of our contribution, is to get it off its feet.
That's the part I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so, that being said,
I would also say, quite frankly, that the lease payment from the university isn't that great. There's a negotiation that could happen there that would be beneficial to the university as well. But right now, we don't know, we're not privy to why that'd be bad.
right, so, but I think we need to stay on top of this, because I don't want this program to fall beside the way. This is a way for folks that don't have the monetary means to get into something, and it appears, I haven't looked into it greatly, a little bit while we're having the meeting, it appears that it's a pretty good program.
Well, the greatest inventions on the planet came from garages and
Right,
places
exactly.
like this, so, yeah,
So
we're not in
we need
disagreement.
to, maybe if we could, next
So,
meeting, we could have
we'll give you an update as to what we've discussed and found out at the next meeting, for sure, so.
as well as along the way, if something comes up, you can talk to each one of us.
If all goes well, hopefully we'll have a solution by the next meeting, but yeah, we'll keep you updated.
Very good, thank you, Rob. So under other business, I always let you guys go first, but tonight, I'm gonna pull rank. I'd like to go first if I could, gentlemen. I got a handful of things here. Yeah. The Hertz project over on the south side has created quite a bark all of a sudden. So I spoke with Shirley and asked if she could have someone explain to us what's going on, because I really didn't see anything come across the memo stand that raised my eyebrows to what was happening. So, but apparently there's quite a few Southsiders that are upset.
Yes, good question, Commissioner. Terry Lahi, property manager. Hertz project, their Fairhaven Work Studio in the south side of Fairhaven. They're currently in the planning process. They're working with the city for the permits, and part of that process is public comments. So the city has received a number of public comments regarding the proposal. All our indication is that Hertz or Fairhaven Work Studios, they're working with their design team will address the city's concerns and certainly will address the comments that have come out there. So that's something relatively recent that came out. I believe the comment deadline was a couple of weeks ago, something like that. So that's why it's right now coming to your attention, I believe.
Okay, so a question. The height restriction changed from 42 to 18, or 42 to 60 feet, is that correct?
I believe there were some design changes that they have been done, and they have been working on different designs for quite some time. So again, I mean, we don't regulate that.
Right.
The city does, and they're working through that with the city at this point.
Right, but it is kind of on our property, so it'd be nice to know what was going on with that. So unless I missed it, I've been really busy. Did that design change come across in front of us?
We haven't seen full designs from them, and we're not required to. Right now, they have an option agreement with us. They've been working on the soil tests, other ground conditions, other requirements, including view analysis, archaeological studies. Part of that is also the planning requirements with the city. So they're working through all those processes right now. We have not seen those now.
Okay, so the city is the one that's taking care of the permitting and the planning, not the port, correct?
Correct. Ultimately, we, if they exercise the option and enter a lease agreement, any development they do there is subject to our approval. So the commission would get to see that. I mean, in some ways, it has to come through the port's approval process, yes.
So under our approval process as a commission, if we didn't want it to be 60 feet and we wanted it to be 42, we would have the option of talking with the builder or the tenant, to be tenant, and discuss that?
I would imagine before we entered into a lease agreement, if they were to exercise the option, we would request that they provide us their plans at that point, and then we could negotiate at that point, yes.
Very good. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
I view this as being very similar to what Harcourt did, because Harcourt found an elevation and they brought it up and they had to go through the permitting process again. I think these kind of projects are a constant evolution.
Anything on?
I want that project to be successful, so I didn't see the public comment yet. I don't know if you want to characterize the nature of it. Sounds like some concerns over height.
Yeah, well,
View,
I think what we,
views.
I think what we, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we originally saw, what plans kind of brought forward, that was going to be, the height was 42 feet. Am I incorrect?
Originally, I believe they had a couple of buildings or 3 buildings down closer to the water in the shoreline area. However, they found out that the soils were not suitable to have those buildings down there, so they've been adjusting and moving. They've moved now 1 building. They're down to 2 buildings, and they've moved 1 building closer to the bluff because the soils are better there. We had a meeting in March. One of our requirements of the option agreement was that they notify all neighbors within 500 feet, which they did, received comments from them, and most of these comments, I believe, are coming from that same neighborhood. My understanding is that right now they may have added 1 more mezzanine or another story to the building, and chances are that is to increase their return on the building. So again, it's within the city for them to decide if that's allowable or not.
So if I hear you correctly, Terry, they've moved back from the shoreline because of the shoreline issues, which brought them up the grade a bit?
One of the buildings, correct. One of the buildings is still lower down.
Yeah, so the one that went up the grade, then they added another floor to that?
That's my understanding, yes. A floor or a mezzanine to it, yes.
Okay, all right. Just for information for my fellow commissioners and myself, because I've been receiving
Oh, have you?
questions.
No,
Yes.
I haven't gotten any. Can you make available to us some of the comments so we're able to
Certainly.
review them?
Yes, I certainly.
I just.
Thank you, Terry.
I can forward what was given to me, yes.
I
Yes.
would appreciate that. Thank you.
On Hertzing, okay, so that one's off the list. We've got Frank. So at the last meeting we had, we had discussions about affordable housing, workforce housing, so on and so forth. So now the affordable housing has blended itself into the workforce housing, and can you define workforce housing for us? Because I've had it defined to me in several different ways, and I'm not sure that they fit. It seems like we're hazing one into the other here. So can you give me or give the commission, myself,
I
some
can tell you
clarity?
what I know, but there's a variety of opinions. So Commissioner Briscoe told me he was going to ask me this question, so it's not a pop quiz. I'm not as smart as I look, but
Frank, I gave you that one and you just threw it away.
Very considerate of him. That was a softball. You just put that ball on the
you
tee.
know, I'm not as smart as I look. Anyway, if you go through, first of all, if you look at housing, urban development, the federal department, they do not distinguish between affordable housing and workforce housing. But many housing authorities, which are in charge of, like the Bellingham, Whatcom County Housing Authority, do. And it's based on this. Earnings from 60%, workforce housing is defined as someone earning between 60% to 120% of the area's median income. And affordable housing is generally for households less than 60% of the median income. So from 0 to 60 is affordable, 60 to 120 is workforce. If you look at it, it's generally described as housing for people like police officers, teachers, workers in industry, young people who say work, building solar panel, whatever down there, that make between 60 and 120% of the area's median income. Whereas affordable housing's from 0 to 60. So it's kind of, but people like to blend them together as one.
Yeah, I don't know if that's I think of 0 to 60 as subsidized housing, clearly, permanently subsidized housing, which is.
It very well could be, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Like I say, the definitions are rather amorphous
Yeah,
when you
I
try and find
think
those
so.
out. And importantly, HUD doesn't draw the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think the distinction's important for ports throughout the state and this port, because I think there is a little bit of a distinction between affordable housing and workforce housing in terms of the ability of the port to support those goals. I think we're on a continuum here, and I think that it's really an open issue, and I could go into more detail if you wanted about why that's an open issue, but the closer we are to workforce housing, the more solid ground the port's on. The closer we are to affordable housing or subsidized housing, the weaker the underpinnings of the theory that gives the Port Authority to act would be, in my opinion. But it's pretty subtle from there.
Is there a avenue we could take to the AG's office to clarify some of this at all for us, so we know where we're at? I mean, can somebody answer the question, black and white, what we can do and can't do?
So let me explain, if I can just take a minute to tell
absolutely.
you that I teach a class to the new commissioners and will this year about port powers at the WPPA, and we talk about the evolution of port powers over time. So you start from the process that a port, like a fire district, is what we call a Dillon jurisdiction from a case called Dillon that went to the Supreme Court. We're a limited purpose government, so we can only do those things that are necessarily or fairly implied or incident to the powers expressly granted by the legislature. So the legislature grants the port's powers, and we can do what's fairly implied. And you see two trends in ports. Number one, the legislature keeps granting ports more powers because ports have a efficiency of undertaking actions. And number two, ports push the envelope. And I told people that when we first purchased the Georgia Pacific property, there's a real question whether ports could do mixed-use developments. That was, we got various legal opinions. But I'll give you some other ones. The courts held that the Port of Seattle could purchase a rail corridor for economic development. Division 1 said ports could provide water service to their own tenants, but not to anybody else. They allowed an ice manufacturing plant, but not ice in excess of the port's needs. They told the Port of Seattle you can't have a private airport or service to serve the airport. You cannot do that. Port of Seattle, they're pushing the envelope. They wanted to build a hardboard plant, and the legislature, the court said no. The Attorney General said no to that one. The Port of Seattle wanted to create a fire district inside their airport, and the Attorney General said no. And then some ports wanted to run a piloting service for big ships, and the Attorney General said yes. So who can access the Attorney General? The county councils and the legislators can access the Attorney General. We don't have the right to ask him an opinion. The Attorney General would issue an opinion, and that opinion's not binding. It's an opinion of the Attorney General, but it's given great deference by the courts, because the courts figure the Attorney General understands the statutes and is given great deference. So one always has to be, quite honestly, careful what you ask for in these situations. Do you want the Attorney General's opinion to weigh in? I think that the statutes that ports would be interested in is statutes related to economic development. And I quote the purchase of the rail corridor. The court there said that the port had created, quote, an impressive documentation of what preservation of the rail corridor would do for economic development, and noting that given the record, it was reasonable for port commissioners to conclude that purchasing the rail corridor would advance trade, commerce, promote industrial growth, and stimulate economic development. So a lot of this is using the economic development statute if, in fact, this commission finds that there's an economic development component. And so now if you talk about, let's say, a drop-in homeless shelter, one could always make an argument economic development or trade and tourism or something, but that's pretty far one way. Workforce housing for a port tenant, a tenant that says, hey, I'm going to build on port property, but I need housing for 100 people. That's way over on the other side probably. And in between, we're going to get into gradations of trying to do this. And if somebody challenges it, the courts are going to look at it. And so it's somewhat your appetite for this. But to answer your question, yes, you could go to the Attorney General. You may not like the answer, or we can get our legislator to go to, the way we typically do is call one of the local legislation and ask them to ask a question. You may not like the answer. So I just caution, that is their opinion, but it's a big opinion once they issue it. Because, and you can look up, the Attorney General opinions called AGOs are available online. There's a variety of opinions on a variety of things.
Okay.
So, workforce housing, I think one can make argument. The next thing is, it's always possible for the port to enter into an interlocal agreement with another government that has a more direct ability to do housing. But those, if we do it ourselves, or if we enter into another government, if we do it ourselves, we have to essentially charge fair market value for the property. If we do it with another government, we have to make sure we get true and full value, which is a little more flexible than fair market value, but it's essentially the same concept. And so, I've given you.
Is there a reason why we need to know this right now? I mean, what's on the agenda, or what's on our plate that?
I don't know. The commissioner asked, I respond.
So I'm just
I
trying
mean,
to figure out.
it's been a topic for, what, 2 months now? And I'm still trying to get a clear understanding of whether we can't, because there's forces at work that would like us to do affordable housing. And I've been asked that question, and as a port commissioner, I don't have an answer for him, so I'm trying to get an
And I haven't
answer.
given you a very clear direction. I've said it's on a continuum.
It's kind of
Closer
coincides
to the
with what-
workforce, the easier it would be to do.
You also promised us a 1-minute answer.
Wasn't it a minute? That was a lawyer's minute.
We're going to build and.
But thank you, Frank.
I withdraw my 1-minute remark based on that.
Question?
Was that question particularly in response to the Homes Now request?
It's partly, yeah. We've got a lot of things that we've been asked lately, and we don't really have any answers of yes, we can do it, or no, we can't do it. So, and not that we still have that answer, but I think the answer that Frank gave last meeting it kind of pretty much in line, and I did give him more time. I asked him if he could look in depth, because last time we just kind of, asked him, and he was, not off the cuff, but he was, speaking with not being prepared to speak. So I thought if there was a better in-depth answer than we got last meeting, that we should know it. So, which brings me to the next one, our A2 bond ratings. I've always been kind of in the fog. We saved some money one year, but would you please explain how much we've saved in the, by
Because
doing
of the
what we
bond
did?
rating?
Yeah.
Sure. So in the summer, we refunded our 2010 bonds. We had 10 years left. Interest rates dropped. We asked Moody's to give us a current rating. They did that. Excuse me. They reaffirmed our A2 rating. And that made us an attractive investment to investors. So we were able to offer our bonds at a lower interest rate, pay them a lower interest rate. Had we been degraded, got sideways with the state auditors, had findings, had lawsuits, something like that, Moody's would likely degrade us. And that way, the result of that is being less attractive to investors and having to pay more interest for people to buy our bonds. So it would have a direct financial impact.
Yeah, so if we got in trouble, or we're doing something that's in a gray area, that would reduce our rating, correctly?
Well, Moody's
It could.
It could. They
Yeah.
could look at that and say, you are kind of a higher credit risk.
And we saved how much by doing that?
About $2.5 million over 10 years.
Over the next 10 years, we've saved about $2.5 million. That's a substantial amount of money. Again, questions people that saw the meetings are asking us, well, how much exactly do you save on these bond things, and what's the ratings, and so on and so forth? And we have, I think I spoke with you, a port our size, we're at almost the highest point we could be in the bond rating class.
We'll stay probably at the A rating. Moody's does do a 1, 2, or 3, and we're at 2, which is mid-range. I think if we had different market conditions, just more favorable, we could go 1, 2, or 3.
Okay, but we're pretty close to the top.
Agency our size is.
Yeah, because you can get to AA1, we're A2.
We're A2.
Yeah,
To
so
get to AA, you kind of have to be bigger.
Port of Seattle is, double A something.
Right, they've got a lot more.
Right. But you're correct. So, any government our size is going to be hard pressed to get out of the single A rating. You may have some A1s in there, a lot of A2s, some A3s, but something, $20+ million a year in revenue, $300 million of assets, you're going to be hard pressed to get into that double A rating.
So we just have to be cautious with what we do, so we're good, huh? Thank you, Tamara. Brian, I had a question for you. We've got a climate action team we're restructuring in 2020, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We've been working for a few years trying to get our sustainable strategies program up to speed. We've had a budget a number of years to get that off the ground a little bit more. What we've been focusing on the past few years is really the low-hanging fruit items, a lot of energy efficiency programs. We've started looking at energy production opportunities, and that's been what we've been focused on for the past few years, and looking at some potential grants for like a solar project at the Bellingham cruise terminal. And then this coming year, the goal is to really launch into a climate action plan type of proposal for the commission to consider, which will have some policy statements and policy goals. And hopefully by the end of this year, we'll actually have a consultant team on board to help us really, from a workload perspective, look at some of those opportunities that we can look at implementing some policies at the commission's direction.
And goals was a key word in there. Policies are good, but we need some goals.
Sure.
to get
Yeah.
to.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and that's part of what we're going to be looking at today.
Yep. And we'll bring that forward when we have an initial consultant team on board. We'll bring the the scope of that together to the commission, so we can talk through, is this the approach we want to be looking at, and having some of the bullet point type of questions that we'll be asking the consultants to help us with, as well as then our staff has a lot of experience on that, but really packaging that up into a policy recommendations or goal recommendations, we'll bring that to the commission. Then that would ripple through, pending adoption, would ripple through into some of our budget process, kind of our policy statements for every capital project. How do we look at future proofing for solar projects or other things like that on a larger port-wide basis?
So we've had the team that's been in effect since 2012 has been taking care of the things you spoke to, our energy stuff and so on and so forth. And now what we're saying is we're moving into the next step of taking better care.
Yeah, that's right. Most of the things we've been doing is really kind of on a small in-house basis. We went to a towards zero waste where we're trying to do more composting, and we're then expanding that out to some of our operational divisions, and then energy efficiency projects, small things that we could really do easily in-house. Then that sets the stage to now to try to take a bigger bite and get some policies that will guide it through all the decisions that the commission makes with a lens on some of those bigger issues.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Any questions?
I like the work that's going on, and I think there's opportunity for that committee to have some more representation. And, one opportunity, I think I brought this up last time, is to make this a standing committee that has, where we attend or we have the opportunity to attend, like the MAX committee and the airport committees, because this touches so many different aspects of our operation. And it really tees into so many different strategic parts of our operation. I think it's beneficial for it to have some ongoing presence, and some presence that we're able to interact with.
Sure. Yeah, one thing we could do is, excuse me, is to, as we start to just develop this concept of what the action plan or whatever the policy looks like, we could bring that forward for more commission discussion as an element. I think I'd like to have our staff and our team kind of first evaluate the pros and cons of those, because we are a little different than an operating division like the marinas, where they take their users and get input versus overall policy goals, which is really ultimately a commission decision. But if you'd like to have some outside representation on that, that's a discussion that we should have. But I would maybe like to have us do a little bit of noodling on that and then bring that forward for the commission to talk about.
I like that, noodling.
Good. The noodling you guys do is great. So.
Okay.
So, thank you,
All right,
Brian.
thank you, Commissioner.
The reason I've brought these things up is that staff does a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes in all areas of the port, and there's tons of things going on that aren't brought out at these meetings. The big things are at the meetings, but it's all the little things that our director and our staff do. And I just want people to be able to look back at a particular meeting like this and understand the things we do. We don't just come here twice a month and rattle about 4 or 5 things. That is not what makes the port run as an economic engine for the county. So, various people have bumped into in the last couple of months that, the port's not doing this, the port's not doing that. Well, we are doing those things. We're doing them behind the scenes. And that's why I want to bring a few, not very many of the things to light this evening. One more thing and then I'll be done. Salmon in schools. Is anybody privy to that information, salmons in schools?
I just had a conversation with someone who said that you talked with them as well.
Yes, probably Wendy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't know about the program till Sea Feast, and by the way, Sea Feast, I don't think we've had a meeting since Sea Feast. Is this the first one? This is the first meeting since Sea Feast, isn't it? Maybe, yeah. Sea Feast was great. To all those people that worked on Sea Feast, staff that volunteered, and everybody that put everything together, Saturday was magnificent. I spent the entire day there from start to finish. I couldn't talk by the time that was finished. So many people talking to me about the port, and that's where a lot of the things came to that I was speaking to earlier. Is people just wanted to really ask me about the port. What do you do? Do you do anything? And it's like, well, yeah, we do a lot. Wendy wandered through, and it's called Friends of Salmon Education. It's in our grade schools, basically. Lowell, these are the schools that will be affected. It's Lowell Elementary, Happy Valley Elementary, Carl Kozer Elementary, Columbia Elementary, Parkview Elementary, Cordata Elementary, Geneva Elementary, Sunnyland Elementary, Wade King Elementary, Roosevelt Elementary, Silver Beach Elementary, and Letterby School. Didn't know we had all those schools, huh? What they do is they get eggs from the state of Washington. They put them in a tank in the classroom, and they watch the eggs produce into smolt. It's a program it's kind of a volunteer type program, and they also it's funding. They need to be funding, yeah. It's about, I was trying to remember, I think it was about 2,000, if I read the thing right, it's about $2,000 per school is what the cost is. And I was going to ask my fellow commissioners if the Port of Bellingham was interested in helping with this program. I don't know how we can work that, or if maybe our director can enlighten me on, you can do grant money, you could do something. I mean, it's a great educational thing. And everybody's going, Okay, well, so I'd like to, if you could have time to talk about, think about it.
Is this Windy Shore?
Yes.
Yeah.
If, and I can give you the paperwork. I've
Yeah, why
got.
don't you do that? We'll see if there's some mechanism we
Yeah,
can
it's-
figure
it's-
out
it's
how
through
to
the-
do
it's through
something
the-
that's,
It's through funding through the school
I
systems.
think education's a stretch for us, but,
I'd like to build a hatchery.
Well, this is how you start. You educate the younger kids that are gonna vote on building a hatchery, right? So,
We gotta wait that long.
anyways, I told Wendy that I'd bring this forward and I would mention it.
Yep.
And, if there's anything we could do, I'd like to do it. If we can't, we can't. If we're, by the rules and regulations and law of the state, if we can't do something to help. But, I will say personally, I am gonna donate. I'm gonna try and help, get this thing into more schools than they've got here. I think it's, she's working on 5 schools right now for this year, but would like to expand to the rest of them, so anyhow,
you said it was 2,000 per school?
yes. So 5 schools would be around 10, and I don't think they're, looking for all the whole. It'd be nice if we could do that, but I don't know that we can, or if we can do any. But anyways, I wanted to bring that forward so everybody's aware of that program that's out there.
I'll just share, oh, sorry, go.
I'm done, go ahead,
Oh,
Michael.
I was just going to share a quick anecdote. My father, he was a 5th grade teacher for his whole career, and he did that same thing. He got a kick years back and decided, we're going to start raising salmon in the classroom. And that little bit of raising salmon in the classroom then transitioned to them making connections, and his school adopted a creek. They ended up adopting this creek. They did all this vegetation restoration work on the creek. Happened to be the same creek that they would release the salmon into every year. They were actually able to see for the first time, no one had seen salmon return to this creek in anyone's memory. And they were able to see a creek that these kids got to work on, planting trees, pulling out blackberry, removing trash, and improving habitat, and then actually see some of the salmon return. Now, we're not talking millions of fish like a Alaska-style hatchery, but it is that seed that spurs greater consciousness, greater involvement from students, and does produce some tangible benefits. And so I appreciate you bringing that forward.
Commissioner Bell, any comments? All right, that's all I have this evening, gentlemen, so, let's see, Commissioner Shepherd, anything?
Oh, I'm on first. I just wanted to, a couple things. Second, I appreciated Mr. Cooper bringing up the idea of dry stack storage. And Rob and I have had several conversations about opportunities in the harbor. How can we utilize some of the existing space we have, existing operators to make that happen? I think we see, we've got a wait list in the harbor for boats wanting to be in there. More storage means we can store more boats in our harbor. We've got needs to address maintenance in our inner harbor facilities. Anytime we do maintenance, we're gonna have to shut parts of our inner harbor down to conduct that. And if we have dry stack storage, we can alleviate some of that need. And it's just, I think people will pay a premium for it because the boats are out of the water and they're easier to maintain and require less maintenance. So I like the idea, and I'd love for our staff to think about any opportunities that exist, whether that's infrastructure, improvements that need to be made, or physical space that we can consider to bring that forward.
I would just point out one thing on the, you mentioned the waiting list for the harbor. I think the waiting list mostly is 40 to 50 footers. I believe that dry stack, when you get to 30 foot, I think you're really pressing the outer limits of dry stack. So maybe if we had a dry stack, and if we reconfigured our harbor when we do that, that would come in at that point.
Yeah, I think
But
when.
as a quick fix to the waiting list, the
Yeah.
dry stack's not gonna fix it, but
Yeah.
in hand with the relayout of our inner harbor.
Right.
And when we have to do that, but I hope we don't have to do that very soon, because that's a big bill, that could complement that.
Yeah, if you get those 20-footers out,
Right.
you can rearrange some of those slips for those really high-demand spots that we have.
But
that are.
that's a ways
yeah.
down the road.
Yeah.
Mr. Bell, anything on that topic?
No, I just tend to be a private sector guy, so I think the marketplace, if it has that kind of demand and that kind of price, and you say there's a premium price, somebody would step up. And we've already got one vendor, or one tenant, who's looking at that 2 years from now, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think that the marketplace will come to the table before we can respond as a port. That's my take.
What, is Jesse down here, correct?
Yeah,
No?
Jesse.
Is he entertaining anything along those lines?
I think our staff has had maybe a conversation with Jesse before, and I mean, Rob and I sat there and we counted the number of boats that are currently on the dirt there, and then looked at what it would take to multiply that by 2 or 3, and.
It's definitely underutilized. The ground's underutilized. I mean, there's no arguing that.
Anytime you're using prime waterfront land and it's being underutilized, so I don't know what it takes. I don't know if it needs us to help seed this, where we help with the initial investment and we recoup all of that through our lease terms, or what. But I think it's a good conversation for us to have, because maybe that individual is just waiting for somebody to ask.
Is that, maybe refreshment, is that bulkhead along the south side of them on that property is kind of in rough shape, isn't it? Isn't that something we have to repair?
Yeah, I think that's part of the I&J cleanup. Is Brian still here? The Hilton Harbor, or Bitter End Boat Works?
On the outer portion of the waterway, yeah, that was potentially part of the.
South jetty that goes east-west.
Maybe.
From the ABS pond.
ASB?
From the ASB pond over to the.
Technology.
Yeah, let me pull it up, make sure I'm speaking to the right. So,
Yeah,
this one
that-
here?
yeah.
Or in here, yeah, so this one, which, this is what, Cow Beach, right?
Right.
So this bulkhead is not really part of the I&J waterway cleanup.
But where he launches the boats
Yeah.
is, yes.
Yeah.
So-
Up in this area?
Yep.
Yeah, the main part is actually up in the Bornstein dock right now. I'd have to take a quicker look to see if all of this structure is or is not a part of the I&J waterway.
Do we know what kind of shape that jetty's in along there?
Not off the cuff here, but it's something we could look
Okay.
into.
We
see
can
what
look
we've
into
had.
that and get back to you for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll confirm which parts of this are part of the I&J waterway cleanup. We did break that into phases, though, so I know the current approach is focusing more in front of the Bornstein area.
Could you splash a boat there with one of those reverse forklifts?
Well, he uses that overhead crane system, which is right underneath the arrow right there. Yeah, right now. I'd imagine if you got rid of all that, then you could use a reverse forklift. It has plenty of depth there, and it has a hard edge bulkheads, which is what you need, so.
But you would have to get rid of that structure?
I think that'd be in the way, we'd have to have engineers go in there and look at it. I'm not an engineer, I just play one on TV.
Okay.
We're gonna make him nervous. Jesse's probably gonna watch this and go,
Take the structure away. Well, I think it's a good conversation
Yeah,
to have, so.
For it, Jesse, this won't surprise him,
Yeah.
so.
yeah.
Okay.
Anything further?
Oh, I just wanted to quickly report, I've been doing too much traveling recently. Report back, last week, Executive Director Fix and I were at the Allegiant Conference. I thought it was productive for us to be there. As you can expect, the takeaway messages from Allegiant is they are very cost sensitive, and they very much appreciate, no one from our airport's here, but they very much appreciate all the work our airport does to keep costs low. Look at that, he's even got the.
I'm here today. I'm here. I'm listening for
Very
it.
nice. And so we rank something like number 6 out of.
6 out of the base airports, which is about 40 some of their base airports. They have a total of 100 some airports that, we only compare to the base. The base runs a little more expensive for them because they keep personnel at their base, mechanics, et cetera.
Who was the number one guy that paying him to come there?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
they
our costs
certainly
went up
call out the ones, but.
a little bit because we lost some flights, and anytime you're putting less passengers through, their costs are going to go up. So,
And one of the things I didn't know is that the more flights we have and the more carriers we have spreads out that cost for that airline. And so it gives just extra incentive for us to keep shopping that around. And I'm confident that we are. And it's just difficult to materialize those and see those new airline contracts materialize. But we did really let them know we appreciate the Anchorage flight and the Tucson flight, and that we want to make sure that those are successful. And I let them know that if there's other things that we can do in terms of working with our tourism board to effectively market those destinations, we heard from the Tucson airport was there, and they told us all about their Live Tucson or Visit Tucson organization that really heavily markets their place as a destination and in partnership with their airport. And I know our tourism group certainly does that, but if we're only marketing ourselves in places where we don't have routes, then we're missing part of the puzzle. And the other pieces, we talked about the Mexican routing. Allegiant is still moving forward on that. They expect to initially deliver that out of probably one of their hubs. And if they expand that outside of their hubs, we are an attractive opportunity because we're a port of entry, and there aren't many other airports that are port of entries. They know we need to build out our space, and they're sensitive to that being a big investment on our part. And they were at least conscious of that. So I thought it was a productive trip, and it's good for us to have that kind of FaceTime and really building a lot of those relationships. They seem to value those interpersonal relationships. Brian and his team and I attended the WPPA environmental meeting in Chelan the week prior. And again, major themes of that, which I felt good that we were able to share some examples, is everyone really stressed the importance of tribal partnerships. It was a huge theme of the session, and we were able to really showcase an important one that we had achieved here and use our work as an example. And the take home was that they are just critical and becoming ever more so for every port in the state. And what we do to maintain those relationships and build on them is time and effort well spent.
Agreed.
And the last point out of that meeting was that the WPPA is looking for input from individual commissioners about how we think WPPA should be considering work around sustainability, and particularly around carbon reduction and carbon emissions. It's not been a topic that has really been robustly addressed by the WPPA or the Environmental Caucus, and they're looking for individual input from commissioners. So they extended that. I'm certainly going to continue making my opinion known to them that I think WPPA has an opportunity to really provide some state leadership and find opportunities that a variety of ports could get behind, like alternative energy production and energy conservation, things that we have done really well here, and we can serve as a model for others.
Who's the contact point for that, did they say?
That would,
Eric, or?
No, that would be Jerry. What's Jerry? O'Keefe. Jerry O'Keefe. Yeah. And what I think I'll do is I was just going to draft a brief letter to him sharing my opinion, and if you guys would like, I'll share it with you, and you can consider it as well.
Yeah, no, that'd be fine.
That's it for me.
You're up.
I have nothing.
I knew it.
I'm not running for anything, so I'm.
From?
Really quick one. I'm not sure if we've talked about the Bellingham Tune-Up event, but we're looking to do an event down on the waterfront next June. WMBC, Free Hub Magazine, a couple others like the bike park, and they want to expand on that and do a CFE-style event down there. I just want your permission for the port to write a letter of support for that event. They're going for grant funding from the city of Bellingham from the tourism tax, similar to what CFE's did. That grant funding has become back available now. And I'd like to be able to put your names on a letter to send to them. For some reason, everyone thinks I'm biased, so my name doesn't mean as much.
All caps. You can put my name in all caps.
Cool.
I'm a big fan.
Same here.
Thank you.
So, once again, I'd like to mention, I think CFEUS was a great success. I was there both days, actually. The second day it rained, but I was surprised at how many people were still there. And I spoke with some of the vendors. In fact, I spoke with each vendor and thanked them for being there, the ones that were there left on the second day. And I was surprised to find out that they actually did better on Sunday, the second day, at selling things. Yes, several of them told me they sold more stuff on Sunday than they did on Saturday. I don't know if Saturday was nice out, people were just wandering around and not doing, but they said they did better business on Sunday. It was very well organized this year. And it was actually a lot of fun.
I think if you had a rain cover, then you had a captive audience to sell to.
Yeah. I had a question on CFEUS. Do you think there's a benefit to us having a booth for talk with a commissioner time? Because we were all there, we all walked around, and I really enjoy that. And if there's interest, I think we could each staff ourselves at a booth where we just make ourselves available for whoever wants to come and yabber at us and talk our ear off to do so.
I'm missing the right ear over here.
So if that's an interest, I don't want to.
He linked him.
Yeah. I'll sign myself up for the booth, and it hopefully doesn't come with a dunk tank.
So it's good with me because the Walking Fishermen's Association had my leg chained to the post under their awning. I couldn't get very far. No, I think it actually is, I think that's a good idea. I mean, people have tons of questions about what the port does and what we're doing. That's why I asked some of the stuff tonight. I think
We'll sign up for a booth next year, and we'll get you guys on the sign-up sheet.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything to say? Except let's go home? Meeting adjourned.